Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, I'm John, this is Media True Nerd, and welcome to my 150,000 subscribers. 150,000 subscribers, that's a lot. Thank you all so very, very much for hanging around. And you know what's special about the number 150? 150 is broadly, I think, about the right number of Pokemon there should be. Because, ladies and gentlemen, the number of Pokemon is too damn high. At the time of recording, there are 721 of the bastards. By the time this video goes out, Nintendo will probably have released a few bloody more as well. Way too many. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the entirety of the 721 Pokemon that now live in the National Dex, and I'm going to slim the list down a little bit. We're going to make some cuts. We're going to take out the Pokemon we don't need anymore because there's a lot of duplicates, a lot of useless chaff that's kind of been repeated generation to generation. We can get rid of a lot of that, and we can get the number back down to a sensible number. And a big thank you to the channel Poliwag, who kindly allowed me to use their Pokemon theme song remix as the background music, so we have some nice Pokemon-y music for this little National Dex go through. He does really cool remixes of loads of stuff. I'm a big fan of the channel, actually. I'll put a link to it in the description below. So let's start with the Generation 1 starters and do all of those together. The thing is, back in Generation 1, it was sort of just decided that all starters had to have a 3-stage evolutions, which we've been kind of stuck with since, which was always a little bit weird and unusual. It's not like we need the second stage to introduce evolution. You know, there's bug types in the early game that evolve way earlier than your starter anyway. And that's just left us with all these Pokemon that don't really need to exist. So, for example, Ivysaur is just Bulbasaur, but the bulb's gone pink and it's picked up some salad leaves, so it's just basically completely unnecessary. Something like Charmeleon is arguably even worse, where they actually introduced the teenage emo version into the middle of an evolution tree. Charmander's adorable and Charizard's a badass. Charmeleon is bloody Kylo Ren, and we don't really need him. So I'm going to say that we keep all the Generation 1 starter families, but we strip out the middle tier. Bulbasaur evolves into Venusaur, Charmander into Charizard, Squirtle evolves directly into Blastoise. We do that at about, say, level 30, and to offset the fact that means your starter will be weaker for longer, we just increase the base stats of Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle. Beautiful. Caterpie, Metapod, and Butterfree. Now, I think we've got to kind of be quite generous with these guys because, of course, it's known that Satoshi Tajiri, him watching caterpillars become cocoons and then butterflies, are kind of what inspired his interest in like the idea of Pokemon evolution. So in some ways, Caterpie is like the grandfather of the entire Pokemon franchise, so we should be nice to it. Plus, Ash's Butterfree being set free so it could be with the pink Butterfree is possibly the defining emotional moment of my childhood, and the Metapod versus Metapod battle early on in the anime is possibly the greatest battle that shall ever be waged in the entirety of Pokemon history, so therefore we're letting this family stay. Weedle is quite cute. I have a soft spot for Weedle, and Cocoon is a fine variant on Metapod as well. The problem is Beedrill. Beedrill looks terrible and is terrible, but luckily I've got a good idea, which is Weedle evolves into Kakuna and Kakuna evolves into Ninjask, because Ninjask is a bloody badass. The nice thing is, of course, that also means we can get rid of the rest of Ninjask's family, because Nincada is just ugly and not particularly useful, and Shedinja, though it's a really interesting idea, is kind of terrible because either the opponent has something that can kill it, in which case it goes down in one hit, or your opponent doesn't have something that can kill it, in which case settle down for 5 minutes of the most boring battle imaginable, because Shedinja will just have to slowly wear down everything because its attack stats are awful. It's just a bad idea. So, Weedle, Kakuna, Ninjask. Pidgey, Pidgeotto, and Pidgeot. I like the Pidgey family. I like the fact that they all look like distinct birds, and I don't have a problem with a 3-stage normal flying type being introduced early in the game. The problem is that Pidgeot is and always has been kind of terrible. So I say we scrap the Pidgey family and instead we bring something forward from a later generation to be the kind of the new Pidgey in the very early game. And that's probably the best of the normal flying types of all the games, the Starly family, Starly, Staravia, and Staraptor. Staraptor's a beast. It can really hold its own at the very end of the single player campaign, which the Pidgeot just bloody can't. So yes, Starly is lovely and cute, Staravia is a nice middle ground, and Staraptor's just a badass that can hit like a brick. So yes, marvellous introduction. Rattata and Raticate, you know what, you guys can stay. There's a lot of mice in Pokemon, but not many rats. Plus I quite like Raticate's design with its kind of huge massive teeth, where all the portraits always kind of focus on its mouth and its massive teeth. It's quite cute, it can stay. Spearow and Fearow, however, I don't quite see the point of them. Again, normal flying type, and there's going to be no bloody shortage of those in the franchise. And these ones, they're alright, but they're not particularly good. Fearow's only particularly noteworthy for learning Drill Peck, which back in Generation 1, not many things learnt, and it was quite a good move. However, there's a much better normal flying type that got introduced a couple of generations down the line. So let's get rid of Spearow and Fearow and bring in Taillow and Swellow, who do broadly the same thing but have much better, more interesting stats, better abilities, just generally better, more interesting Pokemon. Plus, I quite like the design of Taillow and Swellow, they're quite cute. Ekans and Arbok Poison Snake Pokemon. Of course, there will be another Poison Snake Pokemon down the line. There'll be Seviper. I personally prefer Ekans and Arbok. I think Seviper looks a little bit over-designed, so that can just go. So we'll keep Ekans and Arbok. Not as Arbok deserves some credit for being such a long-standing member of Team Rocket. Bless you, Arbok. Pikachu and Raichu, well, you know what, I'm not a Pikachu hater. It would be strange if we got rid of them. Plus, Pikachu's a nice design. The lightning strike tail, the pouches on the cheeks, they're lovely designs. And Raichu's a great evolution with the much longer tail with the lightning bolt on the very end, the longer ears, the inverted colour scheme with the yellow pouches. Raichu's beautifully designed as an evolution for Pikachu as well. Absolutely gorgeous. Sandshrew and Sandslash, however, they've just always sort of been there, sitting there in blue next to Cerulean City, sitting there in, I think, silver and gold, just sitting there in the cave just before Azalea Town. But they're not particularly good, they're not particularly interesting. I very much doubt anyone watching this thinks that Sandshrew or Sandslash are their favourite Pokemon, and I'm not really sure what they're supposed to be, like a shrew, presumably, but whatever. I'm going to say get rid of them and instead bring up something that always got a bit of a bad time in life. The Hippowdon family, because that was a hippo, a ground hippo, and hippos are cute and adorable. And like, poor Hippowdon had such a bad time because it got introduced so late in the game in the 4th generation that everyone already had their team kind of settled at that point. So I don't think anyone ever really used it. But in fact, it's a pretty good Pokemon and it's a kind of cute, cool design. I like Hippowdon, so that can be brought up nice and early into the game. Now the Nidoran family, this one needs some cleaning up for a while because of course Nidoran female and male are separate species because they predate the concept of Pokemon having gender. So let's get rid of Nidoran female and male. Let's just have a single Pokemon called Nidoran that in its female form looks like Nidorina and in its male form looks like Nidorino. When the female one evolves it becomes Nidoqueen, the male one evolves it becomes Nidoking. So we've halved the number of Pokemon this represents in the Pokedex from 6 down to 3, but we get to keep Nidoqueen and Nidoking because honestly I think they're both kind of pretty cool designs, especially Nidoking. And the poison ground type is, I think that's a unique typing for this family. I can't think of another poison ground type off the top of my head. Clefairy and Clefable are pink blobs that I cannot for the life of me figure out why they exist. Clefable is not a terrible Pokemon, it's just they are design-wise pink blobs. Lore-wise, well, as far as I can tell, Clefairy is just shy and Clefable just has a really good sense of hearing. That's pretty much all we learn about them from the Pokedex. There's kind of a vague rumour they came from the moon, but as far as I can tell, that's never really was substantiated in any form. So, you know what? We've got some better pink blobs coming up, so the entire Clefairy family can go away. Vulpix and Ninetales, even though we've got the Fennekin family coming up, I think we can keep Vulpix as a Firefox, because Vulpix is really rather adorable. And I quite like the Six Tails becoming Ninetales thing. Ninetales is a really elegant, cool looking Pokemon too, though we have to change its cry to that horrendous thing that it does when it comes out of its Pokeball. God, I had a Ninetales the first time I played Pokemon Blue, and oh, the noise that thing makes is horrendous. We changed the cry, we can keep both of them. Jigglypuff is of course another mainstay of the series. It's even been in every Smash Brothers since the beginning, so we're keeping that. But does anyone really care about Wigglytuff? Let's just get rid of Wigglytuff, keep Jigglypuff, and just make Jigglypuff a whole lot stronger to compensate, because Jigglypuff is, you know, a firm part of the franchise now. We can't get rid of it. Zubat and Golbat, and indeed, of course, Crobat, because now we need to touch upon the addition of later evolutions. What Nintendo very often did during Pokemon is, if they figured out a Pokemon was actually too weak, they'd add an evolution later in a subsequent generation to make them stronger. Of course, that was always putting a band-aid over a wound. You should have just, you know, gone back and changed the stats of the original to make them stronger. But because so many generations of Pokemon could communicate with each other, you know, through trading between 1 or 2, or bringing Pokemon forward from 3 to 4, as a result of that, like, they never really got around to just changing Pokemon stats. They just had to keep kind of stacking on new evolutions and pre-evolutions to try and balance the game better. So obviously, just get rid of Crobat and keep Golbat, because Golbat's the classic design anyway. I just quite like its massive open mouth. I like the Pokemon is like 50% mouth. It kind of is truly quite horrific. Plus, you know what? Zubat using supersonic honours in Mount Moon. I don't think any of us will ever forget that, so we've kind of got to keep it. Oddish, Gloom and Vileplume. I don't think any of us can not love Oddish, because Oddish is basically just a blue turnip that wanders around and has odd in the name. The problem is its evolutions aren't particularly interesting. Gloom is just Oddish but drooling, and Vileplume is just a smiley blue blob with a big flower on its head. It's also just another grass poison type. It's effectively pulling double duties with the Bulbasaur and Venusaur family. In fact, I think they're basically pretty much identical. Sure, Vileplume and Gloom learn some unique moves, like they learn Petal Dance, whereas the Bulbasaur family doesn't, but effectively you know, a slow grass poison type with a high special attack that learns all like the poison powders and sleep powders and hits with some heavy special grass attacks, Oddish doesn't bring anything new to the table. So as much as I find Oddish cute, I'm sorry, the entire family is going. Paris and Parasect are going, and quite frankly, that's for Paris' own good, because the story behind Paris is terrifying, because it's, you know, got mushrooms on its back, and when it's evolved, the mushrooms take over, and its eyes are these horrible, horrific, hollow ball things, like its entire soul has been eaten by a mushroom. Plus, Bug and Grass is a pretty terrible typing to begin with. Parasect only learned one good move, Spore, and it was too slow to bloody use it, so I'm glad to get rid of them. As the Bug Grass type does at least deserve to be represented, let's bring forward the Swaddle family, because the Swaddle family were really, really cool. Nintendo pretty much ran out of ideas for how to make a little worm Pokemon cute, pretty much straight after the first generation, actually. But Swaddle was actually probably the cutest they ever made, and Swadloon is one of their best cocoon Pokemon, how it looks like it's like having a sick day and wrapping itself up in a leaf like it's a blanket when it's ill, and that's a beautiful, cute way of doing a cocoon. In fact, Swadloon's actually my favourite of all the cocoon Pokemon, whereas Leavanny is, well, it's not actually good, but I quite like the design of it. So you know what, if we have to have Buggrass represented, and sure, why not, let's do that. Let's have the Swadloon family here. Venonat and Venomoth are the sort of Pokemon that I started doing this to get rid of, quite frankly. Venonat, a little bug poison type, evolves into a moth that's also a bug poison type that learns things like poison powder, and mysteriously they always learn bloody psychic attacks. Why do so many bug Pokemon learn psychic attacks that they have absolutely no business knowing? No, Venonat and Venomoth are completely unremarkable and interesting, getting rid of them. Diglett and Dugtrio, however, how could I possibly get rid of Diglett or Dugtrio? That's so beautiful, simple. I just love the idea of just a little Diglett, just this little thing sticking out of the ground with its cute little nose, and then it evolves into three of them. I'd keep this just for the design, but the nice thing is, of course, they actually found a way to make Diglett and Dugtrio useful. Dugtrio gained the ability Arena Trap, meaning when you sent Dugtrio out, unless your opponent was a flying type, they weren't able to leave, meaning Dugtrio actually found a place in the competitive battling scene briefly for revenge killing. So Dugtrio is actually useful, so it gets to stay. Meowth and Persian. Meowth, as the second longest serving member of the anime cast after Pikachu himself, I think has to stay, and we all love Meowth. But Persian, who really cares about Persian? Get rid of Persian, keep Meowth, give Meowth better stats. Psyduck, same basic problem. Psyduck is awesome, and Misty Psyduck is possibly the greatest character that's ever been developed in any form of media ever. It evolves, however, into the much less interesting Golduck. Get rid of Golduck, make Psyduck much more powerful. Mankey and Primeape. I was going to be harsher to these guys, but there's something I love about the design, which is when you look at Primeape and Mankey, you know, kind of just from looking at them, that they are angry and fast and aggressive, and that perfectly suits their stats. High speed, high attack. And when the design represents the stats so perfectly, I kind of like it. That's good design. So therefore they get to stay. Growlithe and Arcanine. Oh, of course we're keeping these guys. These are definitely like my favourite of all the dog Pokemon that were ever kind of developed. Growlithe as a little loyal fire puppy, and then Arcanine is just majestic as anything. So yes, of course we are keeping both Growlithe and Arcanine. Poliwag, Poliwhirl and Poliwrath. I've got a soft spot for Poliwag. The problem is there was a family that did the whole tadpole thing much better, introduced a few generations down the line, and that's the Timpole, Palpitoad and Seismitoad family. So Timpole is just a cuter little newt than Poliwag can be, while Poliwhirl and Poliwrath are just boring. Poliwhirl's just a Poliwag that's got, you know, arms and slightly longer legs, and Poliwrath is just Poliwhirl but with angry eyes and an extra fighting type slapped on. Palpitoad and Seismitoad are much more interesting, so we're having them instead. Abracadabra and Alakazam are another three-part family that's got the problem of the middle evolution just doesn't contribute anything. I love Abra's design because I like the idea that because its eyes are like that, it's actually asleep, so therefore when you kind of run into it, it actually never even wakes up. It just kind of automatically teleports away from you without even ever bloody realising it was fighting you in the first place. Kadabra just doesn't add anything to it, so I'm just going to have Abra evolve directly into Alakazam. The Machop family, this was probably going to be controversial because, you know, I quite like Machamp. It's actually a good Pokemon, especially when it gained the No Guard ability in subsequent generations. But Machop is just a little bloke that fights, and Machoke is a bigger bloke that fights, and Machamp is a big bloke that fights, has an extra pair of arms. They're just not very interesting. So I'm afraid just because they are blokes, they have to be got rid of. And that's kind of one of the rules I'm going to be going for. If Nintendo has basically just made a Pokemon a bloke, then I'm afraid it has to go. And we'll be enforcing that rule a few times during this list. Bellsprout, Weeping Bell and Victory Bell. I love Bellsprout. Bellsprout, for just a little bell on top of a sprout with two leaves, to me just has so much personality to it. Weeping Bell, however, is a terrifying, weird clown face thing and has to be got rid of. Victory Bell I quite like, and the family is actually quite nice because it's a grass type that had high attack. Back in Generation 1 that wasn't very useful, but it's kind of found a bit more use since. So Bellsprout can evolve directly into Victory Bell, but by the way, I'm also extending the number of characters that a Pokemon's name is allowed to have to 11 so that Bell can be spelt correctly on the end of Victory Bell there. Tentacool and Tentacruel are pretty much perfectly designed as far as I'm concerned. I find Jellyfish creepy anyway, and Tentacool and Tentacruel are just absolutely perfect for Jellyfish Pokemon, therefore. Tentacool with its 2 little tentacles, and then Tentacruel with its kind of mesh of tentacles. Tentacruel as well, I also love the fact that the eyes moved from the top on Tentacruel to underneath in the shadows to make it look even more sinister, and it kind of gained those kind of blue hanging down bits, so it had like the claws or the teeth of like a big squid as well. I just think Tentacruel is beautifully designed. It's pretty much like the perfect Jellyfish Pokemon. Nintendo nailed it first time, and all the Jellyfish Pokemon that come later just can't stand up to it. So obviously Tentacool and Tentacruel get to stay. Geodude, Graveler and Golem, I've never quite got them. They're just rocks. Geodude's just a rock with a face, and so's Graveler, and basically so's Golem. There's a Pokemon that does what Geodude kind of wants to do, I think, so much better down the line. So I want to bring in the Roggenrola family. Roggenrola, Bulldor, and Gigalith. I absolutely adore these guys. Roggenrola, where it's just got the little feet, you just feel like kind of has to waddle along with its single eye. And then Bulldor, where its face is starting to evolve, but it starts to drag itself along the ground with kind of the little kind of hands it's developed at the front. And then kind of Gigalith, where it almost looks like a rock lion with a sticky out bit. It's just so much more beautiful and well designed, and it feels like it's actually evolving and gaining something. You feel its personality shifting as you look at it, which you don't get from Geodude at all. So Geodude out, Roggenrola gets a more prominent role. Ponyta and Rapidash. I really like the idea of a fire horse. The problem is Ponyta and Rapidash are almost identical. So scrap Ponyta, Rapidash can just become a single evolution because there's just not much point having both of them. Slowpoke and Slowbro, well, obviously we're keeping these guys. Slowbro is a beast. He's a really good wall. People generally, when they're talking about kind of bulky water types, when they talk about like using water types as walls, they always talk about Swampert. Slowbro did their job really damn well as well. Slowbro was excellent. And Slowpoke and Slowbro's design beautifully kind of works with their stats as well. They're supposed to have really high defense. They're really kind of tanky. Well, obviously they are. They're so oblivious you can punch them in the face. They don't even realize they've been punched. They're beautiful. Slowking, however, was completely unnecessary and won't be making the list. Magnemite and Magneton. Okay, sorry. Magnemite is basically just 2 magnets and an eye, and Magneton was even more magnets with even more eyes. And then they evolved into Magnezone, which was even stupider, because then it was just a block of metal that had like, oh god, it was... Magnezone is just like one of the worst designed Pokemon. It's hideous. It's just so bad. And Magnemite and Magneton, to my mind, even though they're really cool, you know, Electric Steel's a nice type, and the fact they come with Levitate means they've got a good resistance. I just can't get over how bad that design is. You know what? There's no shortage of not particularly fast electric types with high special attack. They're being got rid of. Farfetch is obviously going, because Farfetch wasn't even bloody useful back when there were only 150 Pokemon. And a Duo and Dodrio, though they're actually kind of cool, I don't mind the design. They are just yet another normal flying type that goes relatively fast and has a relatively high attack, but doesn't learn anything particularly interesting. I guess these guys learned Tri-Attack back when that was useful, but then Tri-Attack shifted to being a special attack, not a physical attack in the physical special split, meaning kind of Dodrio lost its entire point in existing, so bye guys. Seal and Dugong are possibly the laziest Pokemon Nintendo ever created. Normally when Nintendo's being lazy, they just take an animal and they slap a pun title on it. Seal, they didn't do that. They just took a seal and then they called it Seal. Incredibly boring. There's so many more interesting water ice types coming up as well. Particularly kind of, there is a much better Seal Pokemon coming up in a later generation. So I think we'll kind of just wait for that and throw Seal out entirely. Grimer and Muk. When Yahtzee was reviewing Pokemon Black and White, he kind of made the joke that some Pokemon look like they're just squiggly lines with eyes or squiggly lines with angry eyes if it's the evolved form. And Grimer and Muk, that is pretty much literally true. They are squiggly purple lines with eyes and then angry eyes for the evolved form. Poor Grimer and Muk. I don't think anyone really is going to defend them. They weren't even particularly good. They generally show up in the late game. They don't do anything particularly useful aside from annoy you by using Minimize and then evading all your attacks. No, they can definitely go. Shelder and Cloyster I absolutely adore. I particularly like Shelder's little tongue hanging out to make it look kind of harmless, and the fact that Shelder's horizontally aligned. Then when it evolves into Cloyster, it becomes vertically aligned and it gains all those kind of vicious spikes in its shell and the little kind of horn sticking out, as well as the kind of little grin from inside its shell. Cloyster looks properly evil. Basically, Shelder and Cloyster do everything right that Seal and Dugong do wrong. Cloyster's a beautiful beautiful design, and of course it gets to stay. Ghastly, Haunter, and Gengar. I really like this family, actually. Ghost types are kind of interesting, because ghost types, Nintendo really found trouble kind of finding new ways to kind of make new ghost types distinct from previous ghost types. But Ghastly, you know what? It was the first one, so this one gets to stay. Ghastly is kind of like a very kind of insubstantial, incorporeal, gaseous thing. Then it becomes more corporeal as it evolves. Haunter being much more kind of solid, but still having kind of that feeling of fading out of the darkness with the spikes at the back and its hands floating in midair, and then being fully corporeal with Gengar. I like that evolution. It tells a little story as it evolves. Like, the evolutions feel consistent with each other. It's growing somewhere. It's not just the same thing getting bigger, it's the same thing doing something more interesting. So all of those guys get to stay. Onix obviously gets to stick around because it's a giant rock snake made out of boulders, and that's pretty cool. Drowsy and Hypno unfortunately kind of fall prey to the "it's just a bloke" clause, which is Drowsy, well, it kind of feels like Drowsy's half a pig, but then Hypno's just an old bloke who hypnotizes people, and it knows hypnosis moves because it's called Hypno. I just find them incredibly boring. There's so many more interesting psychic types than Drowsy and Hypno, and they weren't even that good, to be honest, so they need to be got rid of. Krabby and Kingler. Oh, Krabby has to stay, if only because of the greatest battle in the history of everything ever, where Ash's Krabby in its first competitive battle was able to take out Exeggutor and Seadra and Golbat and evolve straight into Kingler. Oh, Krabby, bless you. Plus, Kingler gets to stay because I quite like Kingler with its massive single claw. It feels like it just kind of charges at you and it will always hit you with its one massive claw. And I like the fact that they kind of evolved the little kind of spikes on top of its head to make a crown. That's quite cool. Voltorb and Electrode. Normally I'd throw these guys out for basically breaking the second of my rules, which is if you just take an object and slap eyes on it, that doesn't count as a Pokemon, Nintendo. But Voltorb and Electrode get around that because they have such a huge amount of personality, I think, for like just basically being eyes on an object. Voltorb looks so angry, you feel like it just explodes because it's angry all the time. But Electrode, when it evolves, that grin and those eyebrows and those little dotted eyes, it's not exploding because it's angry. Electrode's exploding because it's fun. Electrode just runs up to you and explodes because it enjoys doing it. Electrode's possibly the most evil Pokemon that's ever existed. I just love how much personality you can get out of a ball with a couple of eyes on it. So yes, those can definitely stay. Execute and Exeggutor are also staying, of course, because it's a bunch of eggs that evolve into a giant palm tree that has legs and psychic powers for no well-explained reason. And that's an idea so mad I can't help but admire it. Plus, Exeggutor was actually a really cool Pokemon. Grass Psychic's a very, very rare typing, and if you could get Exeggutor out while under the influence of kind of Sunny Day, it was actually quite a beast. Cubone and Marowak, well, I'm sorry, Cubone's had a bit of a tragic life so far, and it's about to get more tragic because I'm kicking it out for just being a boring ground type that doesn't really add anything. Ditto Marowak. Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan. Hitmonlee's beautifully designed with its kind of stretchy legs and its sunken eyes, and it doesn't even have a head anymore. It feels kind of slightly weirdly and unearthly because it doesn't have a head, it's just got its eyes sunk into its chest. I just think it's beautiful design. Hitmonchan I was more unsure about, but I think it can just about stay. I think it's quite cool, especially next to the other members of the family, because when we get round to Tyrogue, the pre-evolution that was introduced into the next generation, and Hitmontop, they're both so terrible they have to... I mean, what the hell are Nintendo thinking with Hitmontop? It just doesn't look anything like it belongs in the Hitmonlee, Hitmonchan family, and Tyrogue is just boring. So both of those can go, but Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan can stay. Licky Tongue was always confusing, and then they introduced Licky Licky that was even more confusing. In both cases, the Pokemon, I just don't see any reason for it to exist, and it wasn't even particularly good. I'm not sure anyone will mourn the passing of the Licky Tongue family. Coughing I absolutely love, because look at Coughing's face, he just loves being a Coughing. And Wheezing, well, Wheezing doesn't look desperately happy to be a Wheezing, to be honest, but somehow I just like the idea of the fact that it's a poison type and thus kind of spews poison gas everywhere, just kind of looking like this kind of horrendous mouse-shaped poison blob of fear and horror. It's quite good. Plus, Wheezing, of course, served for a long time on Team Rocket, so therefore we deserve to cut it a break. Rhyhorn and Rhydon, and then subsequently introduced Rhyperior. I guess this is supposed to be like a rock rhinoceros or something, but I just don't quite get it. Plus, it's a rock ground type, which is slow and has high defense and a fairly high attack, and... yeah, you know what, there's a million of these things, we don't really need all of them. Plus, it didn't help the fact that Rhydon looked less like a rhino and more like just a bloke with a horn on its nose, and then Rhyperior is just yet another example of Nintendo creating a really, really stupid-looking third evolution onto the end of a family that looked okay. Like, what were they thinking with Rhyperior? It's got little holes in its hands to blast boulders out of. That's just bloody stupid. So yeah, sorry Rhyhorn, in a world where there's too many rock ground types, you have to go. Chansey, of course, and its extended family that it gained in subsequent generations, because now it has a pre-evolution and a subsequent evolution. To my mind, Chansey is the most nicely designed of all of them. It always struck me as a shame that Blissey became actually quite, used competitively because it had so much HP and so much special defense, so it was quite a good special wall. So Chansey never got the love, even though Chansey, I think, kind of looks nice because Blissey was over-designed. So what I'm going to say is get rid of the rest of the Chansey family, give Blissey stats to Chansey, and just let Chansey shine on its own. Tangela, did you have any reason to exist? No, not particularly. You were a pure grass type at the time when you were the only pure grass type, because all the other grass types were either grass poison or grass psychic. But even then, you just weren't very useful. You gained a subsequent evolution, Tangrowth, but that just looked even stupider and didn't really add much to the family. So I think we can get rid of that quite happily. Kangaskhan, I to this day do not know why Nintendo felt that Genghis-Khan and a kangaroo needed to be crossed to create a Pokemon. Then it was subsequently useless for so many generations that Nintendo gave it a Mega Evolution, where Kangaskhan encouraged the small baby it brings into battle with it to fight alongside it, which was even more stupid. So just for having too much layers of stupidity piled on top of each other, it's going. Horsey and Seadra, you know what, you're the only seahorse Pokemon. Horsey's quite cute and Seadra looks quite badass, so they're allowed to stay. But Kingdra can go, because why did Nintendo think that Seadra needed an evolution that made it look like Kingdra was, incredibly old and about to die of falling apart or something? It was just... Kingdra's design was always baffling to me. Though if we really want, let's give the Water/Dragon typing back to Seadra and increase its stats a little bit, because Water Dragon is a good type and does kind of suit Seadra anyway. Goldeen and Seaking, now these guys fall prey to my third rule, which is if it's a water type that's just a fish, it's going. Because every single generation seemed to introduce a fish that was a water type that had nothing interesting about it other than just being a fish, and they were just all incredibly boring. So Goldeen and Seaking, you're both going for that reason. Staryu and Starmie, well, we have to keep Starmie because there's too many memories for those of us who were there in the first generation of being utterly slaughtered by Misty's Starmie. But Staryu is just Starmie, but a bit smaller, so get rid of Staryu. Starmie's just a single evolution, let's keep that. Mr. Mime was terrifying and not desperately good at anything. I don't think anyone will mind its passing, nor of its even worse pre-evolution Mime Jr. Scyther, if we were judging this on Generation 1 alone, would probably go, because Scyther wasn't particularly good. Not terrible, but not particularly good. But then, of course, in the second generation, it gained its evolution, which unfortunately, thanks to Pokemon Stadium 2, I know is supposed to be pronounced Skizzer, even though I think Skyzor would be much more badass, but whatever. So Scyther evolving into Skyzor, yeah, I'm just going to keep calling it that because I prefer it, is obviously kind of worth sticking around. Because Scyther looks really cool. The only problem with it was its stats were always kind of terrible. It didn't really learn any good moves, but that's been sorted out in subsequent generations, and Skyzor's an utter badass and looks incredibly cool. So yeah, we can definitely keep this family around. Jinx is always a bit creepy. Ice Psychic type is a lovely unique type, but I just feel like no one ever really used it. Its stats weren't very good. The type matching isn't actually spectacular. It's kind of weird that it's a Pokemon which is obsessed with kissing. And it also, of course, subsequently would gain a pre-evolution that, despite being, canonically a baby, was also kind of making flirty faces in all of its sprites, which was weird. So goodbye, Jinx, you were just too odd for this world. Electabuzz, I like the Electabuzz family. Electabuzz would actually gain both a pre-evolution and a subsequent evolution that were both really good for different reasons. Elekid, I think, is the only pre-evolution I actually think adds something. It's a really fun, interesting design. I like Elekid. Electivire, I think, has a really bad, uninteresting design. I think Electabuzz looks better, but Electivire gained a bunch of skills and abilities and stuff that actually made it really, really useful, but I just didn't like the design. So I'm going to say take Electivire's ability and stats, give them to Electabuzz, throw out Electivire, and just have the family be Elekid into Electabuzz. Magmar went on the same journey, gaining the pre-evolution Magby and the subsequent final evolution Magmortar. Magmortar, however, was just never used, just wasn't as good as Electivire, and Magby was just not a particularly good design, and I never particularly liked Magmar either, so I guess the entire family can go. Pinsir, you can definitely go as well. You got a subsequent Mega Evolution, of course, we should remember, but that one was terrible and looked awful as well. Pinsir has no point in existing. Its stats aren't great, the design is uninspiring, it's just not interesting. Tauros can stay in honour of the many hours all of us will have put in Generation 1 trying to catch the bloody thing in Safari Zone. That would all be time wasted if we didn't now add it to this Pokedex. Magikarp and Gyarados, well, of course they go. Magikarp into Gyarados is just the perfect classic ugly duckling story. Magikarp is beautiful and charming of its own. I love Magikarp. And Gyarados just is amazingly strong, has a good, interesting, fairly unique typing, looks incredibly badass, and remains at least somewhat competitively viable to this day. Gyarados is just a fantastic Pokemon. Lapras, I quite like the design of. I like the kind of the Loch Ness Monster thing and the shell on its back. The problem is there are just so many better water ice types coming out. The Lapras I just can't really justify keeping because it's just not that interesting. Ditto can stay, because obviously someone has to stay in the daycare and have sex with literally everything. Eevee can stay too, of course, because Eevee is utterly adorable. The Eeveelutions, however, we need to kind of have a bit of a think about. Jolteon's an absolute star. I love the kind of the spiky electric collar around it. Plus, of course, Jolteon was probably one of the more useful Eeveelutions as well. So Jolteon can stay. Flareon can go, because even though I don't mind the design, Nintendo has had 6 generations to find a way to make Flareon work. And they still haven't. Flareon is still seen as the bloody useless Eeveelution, even after like 6 attempts to make Flareon bloody work. So Flareon can just go. It's had more than enough chances to pick up its ideas. Vaporeon I don't really get. Like, I guess it's supposed to be like a mermaid with like a bit of a fan thing around its neck and like fish ears. I just don't really get it. I think kind of Glaceon is quite similar to Vaporeon, but much, much better. So Glaceon from way, way, way down the line in subsequent generations is going to kind of be brought in place of Vaporeon. Flareon's just going. Espeon and Umbreon both get to stay because they're both kind of quite nicely designed and quite cute, I think. Leafeon, however, just looks quite stupid because Leafeon's supposed to be like the defensive Eeveelution, but I don't get that in its design at all. Jolteon, I think from its design you can kind of detect like it's supposed to be the fast one, but like I just don't get out of Leafeon at all that it's supposed to be the defensive one. I just think it wasn't designed well for that purpose. So that's going, and obviously Sylveon's going because like many fairy types, I don't even know what Nintendo were bloody thinking about when they invented type. I know when Nintendo had to invent the type, the fairy type. I just think when they were designing some of them, they just did a horrendously bad job of doing it well. So Sylveon can also go. So Eevee can now only evolve into Jolteon, Espeon, Umbreon, or Glaceon. Those are now the Eeveelutions. Porygon I've always quite liked, especially the slightly confusing sense that it's supposed to be the virtual reality Pokemon, yet does appear to exist in the real world. And Nintendo realised it was quite cool too, because they gave it several evolutions, Porygon 2 and then Porygon Z. The problem is Porygon 2 and Porygon Z didn't really add anything to Porygon other than slightly changing its design and just making its stats better and better. So I'm going to say just take Porygon Z's stats and moves and just give them straight back to Porygon. I quite like the early polygonal Porygon over the kind of the rounded, slightly weird looking unstable Porygon Z. So yeah, get rid of Porygon 2 and Z and just give all of its stats to Porygon instead. Omanyte and Omastar, I've always liked, sorry, I don't want to be like a Pokemon hipster here, but I was always quite fond of Omanyte, even before Twitch Plays Pokemon happened and before Praise Helix became a thing. I always quite liked Omanyte as a design. I think it's quite cute sticking out of its little shell. Omastar I don't think is quite as cool, but I think it would almost be heresy to get rid of Omanyte at this point. Now the internet decides it loves Omanyte more than it loves anything else in the world. Kabuto I've never liked as much, but Kabutops does unquestionably look incredibly badass. I love Kabutop's design, where it's got kind of like the downward facing scythes coming out of its hands, and its eyes are kind of hidden away beneath the creases on its rock head, and its head is angled as if it's like a shield. Kabutops is a beautiful design, always been let down by the fact it's never quite had the stats or the move pool to support it. So let's keep Kabuto and Kabutops as well, but let's just improve Kabutops a little bit. And Aerodactyl, of course, the incredibly fast rock flying type. Aerodactyl is beautiful, and of course we're keeping it. Obviously we're keeping Snorlax, but we're not giving it its pre-evolution because Munchlax is, like pretty much every pre-evolution, completely bloody pointless. The legendary 3 birds. Moltres is a chicken that's on fire, and Articuno is just a bird that is blue and otherwise has no real indication on it that it's anything to do with ice. The only decently designed legendary bird, and conveniently also the one that's kind of generally deemed the most usable in a fight, is Zapdos, which I just kind of love. Its kind of big, kind of sparky electric wings. They're absolutely beautiful. Zapdos looks cool and is actually quite tough. We're going to get rid of Articuno or Moltres, and we're just going to keep Zapdos. Dratini, Dragonair and Dragonite. Now this one hurts me because of course Dragonite was the original dragon, but it's not actually a very good one. Dratini and Dragonair are just, you know, little eel things. Dragonite's just kind of a big fat dragon that's supposed to be a dragon flying type despite only having kind of almost farcically, comically small wings on its back. Dragonair evolving into Dragonite always struck me as a little bit odd anyway. I always thought Dragonair might want to look a little bit more like Dragonite first, but no, Dragonair just sort of grows arms and legs and a hell of a lot of body mass out of nowhere. Dragonite's not even that good as a dragon Pokemon. It just doesn't really quite have the stats or the move pool to stand up against any of the later dragons, and I just don't think the design's particularly interesting. So, sorry Dragonite, though you are the original dragon, we do need to get rid of you because there are much better dragons coming up in subsequent generations. Mewtwo and Mew obviously do get to stay, however, they're just utter classics. Moving into the second generation now, and I'm going to possibly be a little bit controversial with the starters here. I think the second generation starters were pretty poor, to be honest. They were not particularly well designed. And that means we're not just going to be getting rid of like 1 or 2 of them at this point, we're going to be clearing out a whole lot, which is Chikorita. What was Chikorita? I mean, I think like from Meganium, it was supposed to be like a dinosaur where like the bud around its neck slowly flowered. But I just don't quite get it. Like, none of them are particularly interesting. Bayleaf arguably kind of has the most personality, I guess. But yeah, they're just there. They don't have any particularly desperately interesting moves. Stat-wise, they're not particularly inspiring. They're actually not particularly good next to quite a few of the starters. They're just not interesting, so I'm afraid the entire family of Chikorita is getting kicked out. Cyndaquil, Quilava, and Typhlosion. I think this is like the second worst designed starter in the entire history of the franchise. Cyndaquil is just this little mousy thing that has fire coming out of its back. Quilava is a slightly larger one of the same thing with a bit more fire coming out of its back, and Typhlosion is just a slightly larger version of the same thing doing exactly the same thing. It's just incredibly boring, and were it not for something truly dreadful that came in a subsequent generation, it would be the worst designed starter of all time. But instead it's only the second worst and is of course getting kicked out too. Totodile, Croconaw and Feraligatr are at least quite cool. You understand what they are. They're crocodiles. Feraligator's got a bit of personality, and so does Totodile, I think. Though as per the first generation, we'll kick out Croconaw just to streamline the family a little bit. So only Totodile and Feraligatr are walking out of here alive for the second generation starters. The second generation is also, of course, when Nintendo started vaguely replicating certain things from the first generation, or at least recreating gaps that they had left out. So in the same way that first generation has Rattata and Raticate, the second generation also has a normal type 2-stage evolution that kind of fills the same sort of role, Sentret and Ferret. I like Sentret and Ferret, however, and they get to stay because I really like ferrets. Ferrets are very, very cute, and I like Sentret's habit of just kind of standing on its tail, and Ferret's stripy design is quite nice and unique. Hoothoot and Noctowl also get to survive when a great many normal flying types will be kicked out. The reason is Hoothoot and Noctowl are actually very different to a normal flying type. The vast majority of normal flying types are fast, have high attacks, and hit hard with things like Wing Attack and Quick Attack or whatever. But Hoothoot and Noctowl aren't. They're kind of, well, they're not exactly kind of tanky, but they're much more effective as walls and support and stalling Pokemon than the vast majority of normal flies. They're not particularly fast. Their defenses are much better. They learn moves like Hypnosis instead. Plus, Hoothoot's design is utterly adorable, and as far as I'm aware, I think it's the only Pokemon that's based on an owl? I think that's true, and owls are awesome, so it gets to stay. Ledibur and Ledian are obviously going, because Ledibur and Ledian are just incredibly feeble, uninteresting type, bug flying type. Ledian's supposedly like a special wall, but it's terrible at that job, and learns crappy, terrible moves like Comet Punch that it's a poorly low attack just doesn't support. It's just a badly thought through Pokemon that's not staying. Spinarak and Ariados, I actually am quite fond of these. They're not spectacular, and there is a better spider-based Pokemon coming later, but I just found myself quite fond of Ariados. It had some fun, interesting, fairly unique moves like Spider's Web that let it serve a unique purpose in some teams. So you know what? It gets to stay. Chinchou and Lantern. The main reason I love Chinchou and Lantern is too many games take anglerfish and make them terrifying, because it's very easy to make them into scary, scary monsters. But Chinchou and Lantern took anglerfish and made them adorable. Plus, I like Chinchou's little kind of like positive symbols in its eyes. And I just like Lantern looking so lovely and friendly and approachable. Water Electric's a fantastic type as well, and I think they might be unique in the Water Electric type. So they're unique, their stat distribution is fairly unique, and they're cute design, so obviously they get to stay. And now we reach a whole bunch of Prevolutions, which are obviously all getting kicked out because they add. Why did Nintendo create Prevolutions? They don't do anything other than just slow down your Pokemon getting good, and some of them are awfully designed as well. Pichu added nothing to the Pikachu family. Clefairy, we've already got rid of the rest of the Clefairy family, so good luck. And Igglybuff is just horrendous. It's just ugly. It's genuinely so much. I mean, it's the ugliest member of the Jigglypuff family, and that's saying something because that family's got Wigglytuff in it. Togepi's quite cute, however, and I don't mind Togetic either. It would subsequently gain, of course, Togekiss as a final stage evolution. Yet another example of Nintendo creating something, realising it was too weak, and slapping an extra evolution on the end later. So, you know what? I quite like Togepi and Togetic, so just take Togekiss's stats and give them to Togetic, and we'll get rid of Togekiss, because once again, it wasn't particularly well designed. Natu and Xatu are just quite awesome. Psychic Flying's a fairly unique typing, and I just love the kind of very calm, serene look on their faces. It very much suits the Psychic type. I like them, and I like the design of Xatu and the markings on him. He's very, very cool. Merapi is an electric sheep with a yellow fleece because it's full of electricity, and that makes it so awesome I just don't have words for it. It ultimately evolves into Ampharos, which is quite cool as well. I just quite like the design of it, and I like the lore around it about how it kind of stands on the top of a lighthouse and acts as a kind of a lighthouse thing. That's quite cute. Fluffy, however, I don't really think that really adds much. Fluffy's just kind of like basically Ampharos, but a little bit smaller and pink. I don't know why some Pokemon do that. They just change colour in their mid-evolution. Like Charmander into Charizard just goes red for a bit with Charmeleon, or Merapi into Ampharos just goes pink for a bit with Fluffy. Don't quite understand why that is, and I don't think Fluffy adds much. So Merapi and Ampharos get to stay, but not Fluffy. Piloswine, of course, I should mention, as we've already kicked out the entire Oddish family, will not be staying either. Marill and Azumarill, arguably these guys shouldn't stay. The bit I do like about them is the little kind of like the blob on the end of the tail that's supposed to be like a flotation device. And I quite like Azumarill, probably more than I like Marill, because like you can vaguely see it's supposed to be like a water bunny that's kind of big and spherical and floats. It's quite cute. So okay, Marill and Azumarill can stay, but not Azurill. Like pretty much every pre-evolution, Azurill was pointless. Pseudo-Widow's unique, but I personally find it a little bit kind of ridiculous, and I don't think it really adds much. A pure rock type's a kind of nice idea, because it means it doesn't have the double weakness to water or grass. I think it was just a bit of a gimmick that learnt some rock and fighting moves, so I think we can do without it. Politoed, of course, as we've got rid of the Poliwag family, isn't hanging around. Hoppip, Skiploom, and Jumpluff. I really quite like these guys, and I was going to let them stay because they've got some very unusual things about them. Grass flying is a fun and fairly unique type. They're very, very fast, which is very rare for a grass type, which means they kind of fill the potentially interesting niche of learning things like Sleep Powder and Poison Powder, but being way faster than normal grass types. You can actually get in and hit your enemies with Sleep Powder before they have a chance to attack you, which most grass types that learn that can't. The problem with them was the design was always a little bit odd. Just a pink blob with a couple of leaves in it, and then a green blob with a flower on top, and then a blue blob with just a couple of little puffs of things around it. They're not designed very well. There's a Pokemon from a later generation that does basically the exact same thing that the Jumpluff family does, but is much better designed. Step Forward, Cottony, and Whimsicott. I love these guys. I think they basically do exactly the same thing that Jumpluff does. They're fast, they're supporters, they learn things like the Leech Seed and the Sleep Powder moves. They basically fit exactly the same role as Jumpluff, but they're much more nicely designed. So goodbye Jumpluff, and we will have Whimsicott in your place. Aipom is a normal type that would subsequently gain the evolution Ambipom, but in both cases they were just a monkey. Ambipom was okay, but not exactly spectacular, and I don't feel like it justified keeping the family. We've got plenty of boring pure normal types Aipom. I think we can do without you and your family. Sunkern and Sunflora are getting kicked out just for being dreadful. I think Sunflora is possibly the worst final evolution of a grass Pokemon in the entire game, and I feel particularly bitter because I caught a Sunkern the first time I played Pokemon Silver, and I raised it into a Sunflora thinking that it would turn out to be quite good because Sunkern is so weak, therefore Sunflora would turn out to be really good, because normally that's how Pokemon works. Incredibly weak first evolutions become really powerful subsequent evolutions. But no, even though Sunkern is, I think, literally the weakest Pokemon in the entire game, if you just kind of take the sum of all of its stats, Sunflora is utterly, utterly dreadful. It looks stupid and it just can't do anything, so it's getting kicked out. Yanma's a bug flying type, which doesn't exactly endear me to it. It would subsequently gain the evolution Yan Mega, which would make it much, much stronger, but to be honest, like many of the subsequent evolutions, just made it look actually more generic and less characterful. Bug flying type is a very crowded type already, and I feel like we don't really need Yanma or Yan Mega. Wooper and Quagsire are utterly glorious and are of course staying. Water Ground is a not perfectly unique, but fairly kind of special typing. Wooper's gloriously characterful, and Quagsire, I just love him floating around, bashing into the sides of boats and not even realising it. I feel like he's kind of distantly related to Slowbro, and I love him accordingly. Murkrow and its subsequent evolution Honchkrow are kind of interesting, but I don't quite get what's going on there. Murkrow kind of looks like with its hat like it's supposed to be like a bit of a witch, but then Honchkrow looked like it was more of like a gangster Pokemon, I think. They were alright Pokemon and learnt alright moves, but to be honest they were uninspiring, and therefore the kind of slightly confusing design means I'm kicking them out. Misdreavus is an excellent example of Nintendo struggling to figure out what to do with ghost Pokemon. Once they had the ghastly Haunter and Gengar family, so ghost Pokemon that looked broadly like ghosts, what exactly do you do next when you want to introduce a new ghost Pokemon? Misdreavus indicated they clearly had no bloody idea, because Misdreavus just looks a bit like a ghost, but with a necklace on it. It's kind of got that wibbly edges thing from Ghastly. It just doesn't look particularly interesting. Luckily, down the line, it would gain the subsequent evolution, Miss Magius, which was much more interesting, so they kind of had a bit more of a witch thing going on with a big witch's hat. So I'm going to say scrap Misdreavus and just have Miss Magius as a single evolution, because Miss Magius at least stood out quite a bit. And I think I actually quite like the design of it. Unknown obviously gets to stay, because somehow I just love the idea of an alphabet Pokemon where you can spell out words with it. That's just beautiful somehow. Though I do like them to be a bit more powerful and actually learn some decent moves. Wobbuffet's a bit of a gimmick Pokemon, and to be honest it's incredibly limited and badly designed, but I kind of want it to stay anyway, just because it throws a bit of a wrench in the works of plenty of battles. It's really more for kind of gimmick multiplayer battles than anything else, but you know what, that's not the worst thing in the world, because if you throw it up against a mixed sweeper and then just trap them in place, then it basically turns into a great big game of trying to second guess each other for what Wobbuffet's about to be attacked with. I think for that alone, it should be allowed to stay. Girafarig is a half giraffe, half something else thing that's got a weird little brown face hanging off the back of its tail. I don't understand it, and neither does anyone else. Normal Psychic's a bit of a weird typing, and it doesn't really do anything useful with it, so Girafarig, you can go. Pineco and Fortress, I love Fortress. Pineco arguably is a little bit uninspiring, but Fortress, I just love the design. The danger of it was always going to be it looked too much like Cloyster, but I think they've done a beautiful job making it its own Pokemon. Bug Steel is an interesting, fairly unique type. It has the stats that suit it well, and it's actually quite effective as a physical wall, so I quite like Fortress. Dunsparce, let's be honest, if I'd skipped Dunsparce, would you have even remembered it existed? No, you wouldn't. Okay, good, then we can get rid of it. Gligar, ground flying, though it sounds quite ridiculous, is kind of cool. The thing is, Gligar would subsequently regain the evolution Gliscor, which is exactly the same thing, but better, and to my mind looked cooler, so let's just get rid of Gligar and keep Gliscor instead. Steelix can stay, because sure, why not? Let's have Onix be allowed to evolve into a massive, great steel snake. Plus, I think Steelix is different enough from Onix. They did a beautiful kind of job, I think, with a slightly extended jaw to make it look quite distinct from Onix. Snubble and Gramble, I don't quite get Snubble. It's supposed to be like a British bulldog, I think, but it's also pink and has spots and a little bib on it. So is it supposed to be cute or scary? And then Gramble's there and just is all of a sudden purple. And the stats weren't very good. It wasn't particularly interestingly designed. It didn't learn any particularly interesting moves. There are many better dog Pokemon it can be got rid of. Quillfish, a water poison type that is incredibly boring. Uninteresting design, it's just a balloon with some spikes sticking out of it. Doesn't really do anything interesting, can be got rid of. Shuckle, Shuckle's a star. Of course, we're letting Shuckle in. And Heracross too, obviously, because Heracross is arguably not the most interesting design, but Heracross is a badass. Bug fighting type is an interesting, unique type. And it's got incredible stats and it's incredibly useful. Sneasel's kind of cool and the Dark Ice type is unique, but it subsequently would gain an evolution which, unlike many subsequent evolutions, actually looked better than it did, Weavile. So get rid of Sneasel and instead we'll just make Weavile a single evolution again. Teddiursa and Ursaring get to stay. I love these guys, they're quite cute. Teddiursa is very, very cute. I like the little moon motif on its forehead, and Ursaring just looks like a badass and actually hit like a brick. So even though it's just a straight normal type, it was actually quite useful because seriously, Ursaring is quite bloody powerful and learned some really good moves, so that can stay. Slugma and Magcargo, I love these guys. I mean, how do you make a Pokemon out of a slug and a snail that works? So you make the slime to be magma, and then you create a magma slug thing that's incredibly slow. And then when it evolves into a snail, it gains a kind of hardened igneous rock shell, and thus gains the rock typing. Oh, Slugma and Magcargo are beautiful. Plus, I like the pun behind Magcargo's name, escargot, the French for snail. It's just beautiful, and of course we're keeping it. I mean, it's bloody useless. It's a really, really terrible Pokemon, but we're keeping it anyway because the design and the idea behind it and the puns behind the name are just too good to be allowed to not exist. Swinub, Piloswine, its subsequent evolution, Mamoswine. Swinub I think is quite cute, and Piloswine I quite like the huge amount of hair that covers it. Mamoswine was the only real usable member of that family, but it was nowhere near as cute or interesting, so scrap Mamoswine, transfer its stats back to Piloswine. Corsola's just a block of coral reef with a smiley face on it. Its typing isn't unique and it doesn't do anything particularly useful, so it can be got rid of. Octillery is kind of cool, and I think there's not really another octopus Pokemon, though I've never really understood why it evolved from Remoraid. So Octillery can stay, and Remoraid, because it's just a fish that's a water type, under Rule 3, needs to be got rid of. Delibird was always a stupid idea, because why exactly is there an ice bird Santa Claus thing? Plus, ice flying is a terrible type, its stats are terrible and it doesn't learn any good moves, so goodbye Delibird. Mantine's cute and awesome, water flying's a nice unique type, the design is cute. Arguably, it's nowhere near as useful as its partner Skarmory, of which it's kind of part of an indirect match pair because it's supposed to be a special defense wall, whereas Skarmory is a physical wall. Though you know what, I think its design is cute enough for it to stay on its own merits, though of course its pre-evolution Mantyke is getting scratched like most of them. Skarmory of course gets to take, because Skarmory is awesome. Skarmory is just a really genuinely effective physical wall. Steel Flying with a ton of defense is actually a really cool typing, and back in the second generation this thing was an utter beast. It was really hard to take down. It's lost a bit of its shine since then, but it still gets to hang around anyway, I think. Houndour and Houndoom, these guys are wonderful. Dark Fire type's a wonderful unique type. This thing was really quite powerful, quite fast. Plus I love the fact the design is kind of based on the idea of like the demon or the devil dog made literally flesh with the horn and the skull motif. I like how Houndour's little kind of skull, vaguely skull pattern on its head moves down to kind of the neck on Houndoom. It's a lovely Pokemon and of course it gets to stay. Phanpy and Donphan get to stay as well because they're utterly adorable. A cute little baby elephant evolving into a massive, great kind of rolling mammoth. Donphan also does something interesting with the elephant motif. Rather than just being a big, tough elephant, I love the fact that kind of you've kind of got the tire tread running from the top of its head down the trunk. So you really get the feeling like, you know, it could roll itself up into a ball and charge around. So its design suits the moves it learns, because obviously it learns rollout. I just like that. It's a lovely little design touch. Stantler's getting kicked out, however, because there's a much better stag Pokemon down the line. And Smeargle is getting kicked out because it's a weird dog artist paintbrush tail thing that had incredibly poor stats and was just a gimmick Pokemon, so it can go. Miltank gets to stay because Miltank is basically Nintendo saying, how do we make a cow into a Pokemon? And you know what? They did a pretty good job. Plus, I think it gets to stay if for no other reason than in honour of the many, many, many times that Whitney utterly destroyed me with this thing using Rollout, because bloody hell, that's, I think, is one of the toughest gym battles Pokemon ever really came up with. The flipping Goldenrod City Gym fight. Blimey. Raikou, Entei, and Suicune. Entei and Suicune are pretty cool. I've always thought Raikou looks kind of stupid, which is kind of convenient in many ways, because we've got Zapdos up there on its own too. So let's just say the elements of Thunder, Fire and Water are defended by the legendary trio of Zapdos, Entei and Suicune. Now, beautiful. Larvitar, Pupitar and Tyranitar. Larvitar's kind of cute, and Tyranitar's an utter beast. Rock Dark type is a lovely unique typing, and Tyranitar was just an utter nightmare to deal with, and has stayed kind of pretty damn scary to this day. I don't really see why it needs a mid-stage evolution kind of hiding in a cocoon with Pupitar though. I just think Larvitar can evolve directly into Tyranitar. As for the legendaries, Lugia can stay, because I think Lugia's kind of got quite a cool design to it. Huo I just don't quite like as much. Fire Flying's a pretty rubbish type, to be honest, and I just don't like the design as much as Lugia. So Huo goes, but Lugia stays. And Celebi can stay as well, because Celebi's pretty cool, I think. Generation 3, and luckily we can generally start speeding up a little bit here, because now we start hitting loads of the duplicates that we no longer actually need, because we've already picked out lots of Pokemon we already like. Trico, Growlithe and Sceptile. I like vaguely where this is going. I like the idea of like a tree lizard thing, and I like the idea of a grass type that's very, very fast, because most grass types are very, very slow. I just don't quite understand what Sceptile is. Why is it a big, slightly fat lizard with a massive great fern sticking out of its arse with yellow balls along its back? I just don't quite get it. You know what, I'll let Trico and Sceptile stay. I'll kick out Grovyle as usual, but only on condition that Sceptile permanently kicks out its sprite for the Mega Evolution, which I think looks better. Torchic, Combusken and Blaziken can actually all stay, purely because I think actually Torchic evolving directly into Blaziken would look a little bit ridiculous. I think that's kind of too big a jump to make. Lovely design, firefighting's kind of cool, and I just think the design of all three of them is quite beautiful. Mudkip, however, can evolve directly into Swampert without needing Marshtomp. Obviously, we're keeping that family. Mudkip's a glorious design, and Swampert is both cool design and also very, very useful. Poochenna and Mitechenna, we just don't need. We can get rid of them. Zigzagoon and Lino-1, and I still don't bloody know how you're supposed to pronounce Lino-1. Honestly, at this point, we've already got Sentret, and Rattata and Raticate. We don't need these guys. Wurmple, Silcone, Beautifly, Cascone, and Dustox is basically this game just copying Caterpie all over again, but we've already got Caterpie, we don't need that. Lotad, Lombra and Ludicolo, while I vaguely like the idea of a water grass type, I just don't quite understand where this family's going. Like, Lotad is clearly like a frog with a lily pad, but then it eventually just becomes a dancing hat man, so I don't get it. The typing's nice, but the design's a little bit odd, and to be honest, Ludicolo, though it was okay, didn't really quite have the stats or the moves to stand up, so I think we can get rid of them. Seedot's much the same story. I like the idea of an acorn evolving into something, but why did an acorn become an angry man with leaves for hands and a giant backward brushed beard. No, that confusing family can definitely go. Wiggle and Pelipper can stay because I quite like seagulls and pelicans, and you know what, it's nice to have an early game water flying type that's a little bit different to the others that we've seen so far. Ralts, Curlier and Grandival kind of fail rule 1. They're basically just people. In fact, way too many psychic types Nintendo developed were just people. In this case, it's people wearing a silly hat, so let's get rid of that, I think. Surskit, I think, is pretty much the first moment you can tell that Nintendo just bloody gave up. Surskit was really hard to find in the 3rd generation, but when you did find it, it was incredibly badly designed and completely bloody useless, and when it evolved, it lost the only interesting thing about it, which was its unique typing, to become yet another bug flying type that was completely bloody useless, so this can definitely go. Shroomish and Breloom can stay, however. I love Shroomish and Breloom. I like the fact that Shroomish is a little thing that just kind of waddles through the forest, spraying spores at anything that tries to attack it, and evolves into this kind of big punchy creature with a big mushroom hat thing. I like that, that's kind of cool. Plus grass fighting is fairly unique, so Breloom gets to stay. Slack Off, and I presume Slacking, though I always prefer to pronounce his name Slaking, because I think felt it had a bit more kind of weight to it. I can obviously stay, though like some mid-evolutions, Vigoroth really confuses me. I just don't quite understand why Slack Off, very strong but only can attack every turn, evolves briefly into something that can attack every turn and is much faster and can't be put to sleep, before evolving straight back into something that's incredibly powerful but can only attack every other turn. Again. Anyway, Slacking's very powerful, very unique, and very, very fun and cool to use tactically. So yeah, Slack Off and Slacking can stay, but Vigoroth we can get rid of. Whismur, Loudred, and Exploud are honestly just a little bit pointless. They're just normal types that have nothing interesting going on, so we can get rid of them. Makuhita and Hariyama I think we can keep, though. Makuhita, I just like the idea it's just like this little kid that's learning to sumo fight and box for the first time. I think it's got a kind of a cute little kid face on it. Whereas Hariyama, to me, just looks like a total badass, so that gets to stay. Something about Nosepass's design just tickles me the right way. For some reason I like the idea that the Easter Island statues can be a Pokemon. So sure, that can stay. Though not its subsequent evolution Probopass, which mysteriously grew a big bushy moustache, which was quite frankly baffling. No, we'll just keep Nosepass. Skitty and Delcatty are pretty much pointless. They kind of look a bit like Eevee rip-offs, but nowhere near as fun or interesting. Sableye is a unique typing, but to be honest I think we can do without it. There'll be plenty of ghost types by the end of this list, and that one's a bit uninspiring. Mawile, for the life of me, I don't know what I'm even bloody looking at. Is it supposed to have like a massive, huge mouth longer than its body sort of swept over the back of its head and it's kind of facing away from me at all times? I don't quite get Mawile. I think it's appallingly designed and it's not even that useful, so that's going. Aron, Lairon and Aggron. Part of the reason I got rid of Rhyhorn was because I knew these guys were going up. Because honestly, I think these guys kind of do that role much, much better. I quite like Lairon and Aggron. I think Aron we can do without, however. So let's just keep Lairon and Aggron. Though let's actually swap out Aggron permanently for Mega Aggron. Because the Mega Evolution for Aggron is actually one of the few that looks pretty damn badass. Meditite and Medicham. While I vaguely like the idea of a fighting psychic type, I just can't get away from the fact that Medicham does appear to be wearing partially inflated parachute pants into battle. And I just think they're not particularly well designed, so they can go. Electric and Manectric, I actually quite like the design, but I'm going to kick them out anyway because they are basically just this game's Mareep or Pikachu, early game straight electric types that you can have in your team. And to be honest, these guys don't bring anything new to the table. They're pretty fast, they have pretty high special attack, there's just nothing interesting about them, so as it's been done before several times, they go. Plusle and Minun definitely go. They're just a dual battle gimmick and have no real place in the game therefore. And Volbeat and Illumise, just I don't even understand why these guys exist. Pure bug types that learn some okay moves, but generally their move pool is uninspiring and their stats are poor, so they can go. Rosella I quite like with its flowers for hands, and it would subsequently go on to evolve into Roserade as well as gaining a completely useless pre-evolution. So Roselia and Roserade can stay because even though they are just grass poison types, they're pretty damn powerful ones, and I guess it doesn't hurt to have a couple of them floating around. Gulpin and Swalot fall foul of rule 2, you can't just have things with faces on them, because Gulpin is basically just supposed to be a floating stomach and Swalot is just a floating purple thing that eats things. Yeah, I think we can do without that. Kavana and Sharpedo I really, really like. Kavana's a piranha, and I quite like the idea of a piranha evolving into a shark. Okay, fine, they're not the same thing, but I like the idea of like a very aggressive, mean water type. Water Dart was a cool type as well, and I love Sharpedo's design. Like, for example, the nicks in the back of the fin, it's been a lot of fighting. That's quite cute. Whelmer and Wailord get to stay, because look how happy Wailmer looks. He looks adorable. And Wailord's just a bloody massive whale, so I think you can say just on grounds of how bloody huge it's supposed to be canonically. Numel and Camerupt both get to stay because they're gloriously designed. In fact, they're almost the epitome of perfect design from Nintendo. Take an animal, a camel, do something fun and interesting with it. Okay, we'll kind of cross it with the idea of it being a volcano. So the first evolution is going to be like, you know, a grassy covered hill, and then when it evolves into Camerupt, it will have turned from a hill into a volcano. So it's a camel that wanders around kind of spewing lava everywhere. Beautiful! A crazy random idea, but it just works beautifully well. Torkoal, however, I think is much less interesting. I mean, okay, fine, I don't know why I like Camerupt, but I don't like Torkoal. Maybe because Torkoal is a turtle and there's more than enough bloody turtle Pokemon already. So Camerupt in the family gets to stay, Torkoal's going. Spoink, I love Spoink. It's a little pig on a spring with a purr in its head, but evolves into Grumpig, who's not particularly good or well designed. So I'm getting rid of Grumpig and I'm just giving Spoink a massive increase in its stats, and we'll just keep Spoink as a single evolution. Spinder's just ridiculous, weird, and I don't even get it. It's not even a gimmick, it's just weak, so it can go. Trapinch, Vibrava and Flygon, however, I absolutely adore them. Trapinch is a cute little variation of an ant that evolves into a flying ant, that evolves into like a sand-based dragonfly dragon creature. Flygon's beautiful. In fact, I used a Flygon, I think, the very first time that I played Sapphire. Flygon's just awesome. Plus a ground dragon type that has levitates, just so damn cool. It's a unique, interesting design. It's a unique, interesting typing. It's going to be miles off the best dragon in this Pokédex, but it's still pretty damn good. Cacnea and Cacturn definitely get to stay because they're so fun and original. Cactus Pokemon with Cacnea with its little kind of spiny arms that it swings around and crown in its head, and Cacturn looking like a cross between a cactus and a slightly sinister scarecrow with its hat and its eyes peering out from under it, gaining the grass dark type, which is also quite a fun, unique type. Fun, unique Pokemon, learn some fun moves. Good enough stats on Cacturn, definitely can stay. Swablu and Altaria, however, definitely have to go. Swablu's just a boring, normal flying type. Altaria became a dragon, but honestly is like one of the worst dragons in the game. I think we can do without it. Zangoose and Seviper came as a bit of a matched pair, one in Ruby, one in Sapphire, but both of them are completely uninteresting, really. Seviper I've already kicked out in favour of Arbok, and Zangoose is just a okay but unspectacular normal type, so that can go as well. Lunatone and Solrock are kind of interesting. The designs are interesting and the rock psychic type is unique, but there's no personality to them. Neither of them have particularly good stats and their move pools aren't particularly exciting either, so just for being a bit kind of weird and uninspiring, they're going. Barbroach and Wishcash are also going to go, simply because I think Wishcash is like trying to do a bit of a Quagsire. They're trying to be like this game's Wooper and Quagsire with the kind of the cute little vacant expression on his face, but they're just not as interesting really. I think the design's nowhere near as good, so they can go. Corphish and Crawdaunt probably would have been allowed to stay, but there are much better kind of crab Pokemon floating around this game, especially there's a few more coming up later, so they can go as well. And Baltoy and Claydol fall foul of Rule 2, which is they're just sort of things with eyes on them, except in the case of Claydol, I don't even know what that is. It's just a random shape with an eye on it, so that definitely can't stay. Generation 3 also had a new set of fossil Pokemon, but to my mind, like, probably the worst set of fossil Pokemon that any generation had. Lileep and Cradley is supposed to be like a Venus flytrap sort of thing, but I think it's just hideous, really, and no one ever really used one. Anorith and Almaldo are equally bad. Bug Rock isn't exactly a spectacular type already, and it was just a bit confusing and over-designed and not particularly interesting. Phoebus and Milotic are also getting kicked out for blatantly being a rip-off of Magikarp and Gyarados, but Phoebus isn't as iconic as Magikarp, and Milotic, though it's okay as a Pokemon, isn't particularly exciting either. Castform's getting kicked out because it's just a gimmick Pokemon, and also because it looks like it's riding around on a pair of breasts, and Kecleon is another gimmick Pokemon, which, while it's at least not quite pure gimmick, I just don't think it really works that well. Shuppet and Bannet's another example of Nintendo kind of trying to add more ghost Pokemon in, but not really having anything interesting to do with them, so they're just sort of floaty ghosts again. So, you know what, I think both of them can go. Duskull, however, can stay, because it would subsequently gain the evolution Dusk Noir after Dusclops. Dusclops gets some credit because it was definitely way more usable than Bannet, and Dusk Noir actually made it at least somewhat powerful. So, for being a little bit useful and having a vaguely sort of interesting, like, almost like ghost pumpkin thing going on, I think Dusk Noir can stay as a direct evolution from Duskull. Tropius is sort of interesting for a grass flying type, but to be honest, we've got a few of those already, and they were better designed, so goodbye Tropius. Chimecho is just, I don't know what the hell was going on when they designed Chimecho. I think this must be a bit of Japanese folklore, because I don't bloody understand it. And then even more confusingly, after this thing was bloody useless and no one used it, they gave it a bloody pre-evolution in a subsequent game for no well-explained reason, so that can definitely go. Absol, oh, I love Absol. Absol was kind of useless in the generation it was introduced in because it had really high attack, but back then that was before the physical special split, so all its dark type attacks lived on special, so it would really struggle to kind of do much. But Absol is just so beautifully designed, I think it looks really badass, so I think we can definitely have that back as well. Snorunt and Glalie, I don't think we really need these guys. A pure ice type where Snorunt is just like, well, I don't know, it's a bloody triangle with a face on it, and then Glalie is just a kind of a rock with a face on it. You know what, we'll just kick them out on grounds of Rule 2. Ah, the Spheal, Celio, Walrein family. See this is how Seal and Dugong should have been done all along. Spheal's adorable, being a great big spherical seal that just kind of bobs along because it's big and inflated. Cedio gains a whole lot of kind of blubber and a big moustache, and then Walrein looks seriously badass with its tusks and its kind of great big hair around the side of its head. Beautiful family, beautiful design, really cool looking water ice types. Kind of this is the reason, yeah, why I didn't end Seal, Dugong or Lapras, because I knew these guys were coming up, and they basically do the same job as all of those, but better. Clamperl is basically just an incredibly uninteresting version of Cloyster, and Huntail and Gorbis aren't particularly interesting either, so all of them can go. Relicanth is a water rock type, and we've got no bloody shortage of them, and to be honest, it looks like it hasn't even bothered to wake up yet today, so I don't think it'll mind being kicked out either. Luvdisc is terrible and has to go. Bagon, Shelgong, and Salamence. Now here we are. This, after Dragonite, finally we get some really bloody cool, badass, and also very, very strong, tough dragons as well. Salamence is amazing, and I'm happy for Bagon to evolve into Salamence, but again, much like the Tyranitar family, I don't really understand why there needs to be a middle cocoon phase other than just padding the Pokedex, so Shelgong can go, and Bagon can evolve directly into Salamence. Beldum, Metang, and Metagross. Despite being a little bit of a slightly confusing psychic metal thing with a face, I quite like Metagross. Plus, it's actually very good. Steel Psychic isn't a unique type, but the other Steel Psychic type fills a very different role to Metagross. Metagross is cool, learns some really good moves, has some amazing stats, so I definitely want to have it around. Though I think we could probably do without its first stage Beldum. We can just have Metang evolving directly into Metagross and it be a two-stage family. The legendaries of Generation 3, however, are to my mind pretty bloody uninspiring in many ways. Regirock, Regice, and Registeel are just things. Well, actually, they don't even qualify for things with faces on them. They're just things with dots on them. So let's get rid of all of those. Latias and Latios are just a matched pair of dragons that don't really do anything interesting to my mind. Get rid of those. Though Kyogre, Groudon, and Rayquaza can stay, I guess. Jirachi is pretty cute too, so that can stay. And Deoxys, I think, does actually a fairly good job of looking a little bit kind of terrifying and sinister with its big eyes, so that can stay as well. Generation 4 is a pretty good return to form for the starters, which is quite nice. The Turtwig family is pretty cool, though I think, again, we can get rid of Grotle and just have Turtwig evolving directly into Torterra. Chimchar can evolve into Infernape as well. I love Infernape. Infernape's a beautiful design. And Piplup can evolve directly into Empoleon. But we'll keep all three of those families, because not only are they actually pretty damn good, Infernape's a damn good mixed sweeper, and Empoleon's a damn good wall, especially as it gains the Water Steel type, which is that unique? I'm not sure if that's unique. I think it might be. Bidoof and Bibareli, yet another pair of early game normal types. I think we can definitely get rid of those. We've got more than a bloody enough of them already. Kricketot and Kricketune are completely boring and uninteresting bug types. We've got way better bug types already. Shinx, Luxio, and Luxray, however, they're a little bit more interesting than the Manectric family, for example, because unlike, say, Raichu and Ampharos and Manectric, these guys weren't special attackers, they were actual physical attackers. So you know what? Let's let them stay. The design's, okay as well. I quite like how kind of Shinx, it's mainly blue with a little bit of black at the rear, and then as it goes into Luxio and Luxray, the spiky black electric-y stuff kind of takes over more and more of the body. So the design was okay, and even though they were early game pure electric types, we've already got a couple of them, they served a slightly different purpose, though we will scratch Luxio and just have Shinx and Luxray. Generation 4 also had another set of fossils in it. Crowdos and Rampardos was pretty damn cool. A fun example of a Pokemon with kind of a bit of a unique thing going on. It had an insanely high attack, but with otherwise fairly flimsy, and it had a design that matched that with its beautiful kind of domed head for ramming into everything. You really got to think this was a Pokemon that just charged around smashing its head into everything, which broadly was indeed what it did. Fun Pokemon to use, learn some good moves, fun stats, nice thing to have, we'll definitely be keeping it. Shieldon and Bastiodon, however, Rock Steel type, there's nothing these guys do that Aggron isn't already doing better, so we'll get rid of them. The Burmy family's not particularly interesting. It either turns into Wormidon, in which case it's just a gimmick Pokemon, or Mothim, in which case it's just yet another bloody bug flying type, and we've got plenty of them already, thank you. Combee and Vespiquen. Vespiquen is pretty cool, but I hate gimmick evolution Pokemon like Combee, where only the female ones evolve at level 20, the male ones will stay at Combee forever, because that basically just trolls people who don't look up Pokemon before they catch them. I think that's really kind of stupid and it's player unfriendly, so let's just scratch Combee and simply have Vespiquen being a single evolution. Pachyrus is just a wannabe Pikachu, so we can definitely do without that. Boizel and Floatzel I would have allowed in because they're quite cute otter Pokemon, but there are some better otter Pokemon coming down the line, so we'll leave them for now. Cherubi and Cherim, kind of gimmick Pokemon, with Cherim especially being just another kind of weather effect Pokemon, so we can do without that. Shellos and Gastrodon, honestly, I just think these guys are basically Lapras, but not looking as nice, and Lapras didn't make it in either, so sorry guys. Drifloon and Driftblim, I love these guys, because Nintendo basically figured out Ghost Pokemon can't just look like ghosts over and over again, you've got to do something interesting. So I love this kind of fact that they're like balloons, but they've got this horrific, terrifying backstory in the Pokedex that they go and steal children by getting children to grip onto them and then just take them away and they're never heard from again. Plus, I just like the slight horror touch to them, like how their eyes are just dots, they've got no emotion to them. They're beautiful Pokemon and they can definitely stay for the design alone. Bunnieri, yet another bloody 2-stage normal type Pokemon. No, we've got enough of you. Glameow and Purugly. Actually interesting to note, there aren't that many cat Pokemon, but there's a much better one coming up, so I'm kicking out Glameow now because there's a much better one coming along. Skunky and Stuntank. While it's kind of nice that there are stunk Pokemon, honestly, like, these basically are just skunks, just kind of little skunk creatures. I don't think Nintendo did anything interesting with them. Plus, there's a much better Poison Dark type coming down the line that I'd like to have in that role instead, so we'll kick those guys out. Bronzor and Bronzong. Here's the other Steel Psychic type after I mentioned earlier off the Metagross family. Obviously, we've already got a Pokemon of this type, but these guys are fantastic little wolves. Plus, Bronzong looks really cool. I love how its face is integrated into its big bell design. I love the idea of a massive psychic bell. It's got some really good stats to learn some really interesting moves, and I love its design, so it's staying in. Loaded pre-evolutions, Bonsly, Mime Jr., Happiny all going, obviously. Chatot,'s a normal flying type that honestly doesn't have much to bring to the table. Spiritomb, Ghost Dark type. Honestly, I just don't like the design very much, and I don't think really many people use it or it's that interesting. So Spiritomb, I think, can go. Gibble, Gabite, and Garchomp. Ah, beautiful family. Finally, we've got another good dragon here. Dragon Ground is obviously a fun type, and I love the fact that Garchomp's kind of got this kind of sand shark thing going on with the kind of the fin on its back. Lovely design. Plus, I like the little blobs at the side of Gibble and Gabite's heads kind of turn Garchomp into a full hammerhead shark. Beautiful design. Comes close to over-design, which is one of the things that many Pokemon in the later generations would suffer from, but I think Garchomp's the right side of that line and just looks very, very badass. Riolu and Lucario. Oh, Riolu and Lucario, you guys are badass. Of course, you're welcome aboard. Skorupi and Drapion. Ah, here's the Poison Dark type I actually wanted to have in. I love Skorupi and Drapion because it actually does something interesting with the Scorpion. Skorupi, of course, basically just has this little stinger at the back, but when it evolves into Drapion, it's got the stinger, but its little kind of arms are basically also stingers, so it's like a tri-stinging Scorpion, and it's kind of leaning forward as well. The face is significantly forward of the legs, like it's lunging forward. It looks really evil and aggressive. I love Drapion. Beautiful design. Croagunk and Toxicroak. Well, technically there are better frog Pokemon that are going to be coming in over the course of this list, but I'm going to let in Croagunk and Toxicroak anyway, just because I quite like the design of them. Particularly Toxicroak, the little detail that really does it for me is obviously it's a fighting type, so it punches you, but it's a poison fighting type, so it also poisons you, and just above its fists, it's got those little claws, so when it punches you, it would also puncture you with its kind of little kind of poisoned claw thing. That detail alone kind of does it for me. I just quite like Toxicroak. It looks suitably sinister. Carnivine is this generation's Victory Bell, and it's nowhere near as good as Victory Bell, so it's going away. Finneon and Luminion. Ah yes, rule 3. A fish that is just a fish. Goodbye. Snova and Abomasnow. I was going to get rid of these guys, though Grass Ice is quite a fun, unique type. We'll keep them, but only on condition that Abomasnow permanently swaps out its sprite for its Mega Evolution, which looks much cooler. Then in the National Dex, there's a huge number of subsequently introduced post-evolutions for earlier Pokemon that we touched at the time. Frostlass, a weird ice ghost thing that I've never quite understood what it is, so it can go away. Rotom can stay as well. I quite like Rotom. Okay, it's a bit silly because it can turn into an oven and thus gain a fire type and stuff like that, but I quite like Rotom. Again, they've come up with an interesting way of doing a ghost, which is like having a poltergeist that inhabits various household objects that on its own doesn't have much form, though I quite like the little kind of the very thin little lightning bolts coming out of it, but can take over various items. That's quite cool. The Spirits, Uxie, Misspirit, and Azelf can all go. I don't think they're very, very interesting. Palkia I don't like because I think it just looks a bit weird. Dialga, however, I think looks like a total badass, so can stay. And just look at Dialga with its kind of metal shield on its front and the crest of metal on the back. Dialga's beautiful, it can definitely stay. After that, I'm honestly not desperately impressed by the Generation 4 legendaries. Heatran, this kind of metal lava thing, I just don't quite get it. I think it looks awful. Regigigas, I think, looks even worse than the other Regis, and I already kicked all of them out for looking stupid. I just think the whole Regi family looks ridiculous. Giratina in its base form, I think, looks silly and over-designed. So as long as it goes back into its origin form, yeah, okay, fine. We'll keep Giratina, because it looks pretty badass in its origin form. Cresselia, I think, just looks a bit silly, because it's just like a pink duck, but covered with crescent moon designs, which I think just looks weird. Fiona and Manafi are just sort of like water spirit things, or even less interesting than like Azelf, so they can't stay. Darkrai, honestly, I just don't quite get Darkrai. Like, I might have let it in if it were a bit more simple, but I just don't quite get some of it. Especially, like, you know, the weird little red scarf it's got, and the fact that it appears to be producing some sort of, like, massive quiff of white hair or smoke or something. I don't quite get Darkrai. I know it's supposed to be like the Nightmare Pokemon, but I just don't see it, so... no, I don't think it can stay. I know Arceus is supposed to be the god of all Pokemon, but honestly, to me, it just kind of looks like a sheep-goat thing that got caught in a gate, so I don't think it can stay. Shaman, however, can stay, as long as it promises to stay in its cute little original form, because then it looks like a little grass hedgehog, which is adorable. On to Generation 5, the only generation that didn't actually begin with its starters, began with a legendary instead. Victini, a Pokemon that I think not only needs to be got rid of, but needs to be destroyed for the safety of the universe. Because according to the lore around Victini, 1, if you have a Victini, you will always win a battle no matter what, and 2, it produces infinite energy. I feel like something like that can't really be allowed to exist. It's like the Elder Wand in Harry Potter. It's better that we just destroy it for the safety of the universe than allowing it to continue existing. Anyway, on to the starters. Snivy, Servine and Serperior, honestly I don't really like these guys. I mean, I get what they were doing. A grass snake is an interesting idea, but Snivy just looks a bit odd. Servine doesn't add anything to Snivy, and Serperior I think just looks a little bit stupid, to be honest. I just don't quite get the whole family, so I want to get rid of the whole lot. Just I think the design is quite poor. Tepig and Pignite can hang around though. Tepig's quite cute and Pignite's a nice evolution for it. Emboar, however, I think is just too much and it's overdone. This is, I think, something that actually really kind of came in during the 5th generation and the 6th generation. Over-designed Pokemon. Nintendo started over-designing them and they started looking a bit silly. Emboar, I think, is like probably the first instance of that, though I think that's probably also part of the problem with Serperior as well. So Tepig can just evolve into Pignite and that'll be a 2-stage family. We'll just give Pignite an increase in its stats to compensate. Oshawott, however, is utterly adorable. Oshawott, Delwott and Samurott. Beautiful. Beautiful. I could never get rid of Delwott, don't worry. Oshawott's adorable. Delwott looks seriously cool and Samurott looks incredibly badass, so we're keeping that entire family. So on to Generation 5, and indeed this is really the generation where I think you can sort of tell that Nintendo started running out of ideas. Generation 5 was also the first generation where, rather than kind of mixing in existing normal Pokemon with the new ones that were introduced that generation, Generation 5 basically wanted to be pretty much exclusively new Pokemon when you were going through the game for the first time, which meant that there were a lot of duplicates from previous generations that we can skip straight out. So Patrat and Watchhole, the idea that they're kind of standing up to look around, they're pretty much a straight rip-off of Sentret and Furret, but nowhere near as well designed, so they can go. Lillipup, Herdier and Stoutland, because for some bloody reason Nintendo thought that we wanted Yorkshire Terriers to become a Pokemon. No, we have plenty of much better dog Pokemon already. We can do without a bloody Yorkie. Purloin and Liepard, I quite like these guys. I've been kicking out quite a lot of cat Pokemon because there's been a lot of kind of just boring normal type cat Pokemon. I like the fact that they're kind of dark Pokemon. I think that kind of suits cats quite well. I like the fact that it starts off as like a domesticated cat and then evolves into something that looks much more like a bigger cat. Oh yeah, that's a nice evolution for it. Yeah, you know what? I think that can stay. Pansage, Simisage, and we're going to at the same time look at Pansear, Simisear, Pampor, and Simipour. These are stupid gimmick Pokemon that should not exist. The only reason these families exist is so that the gym leader in the first city of Generation 5 can always have a Pokemon that's super effective against you. But then you get given one of these Pokemon that's super effective against the gym leaders, entirely defeating the entire bloody point. They're a stupid idea. They shouldn't exist. Get rid of them. Munna and Mushana, pink blob with face on it, got rid of under Rule 2. Pidove, Tranquil and Unpheasant. Well, this is how far Nintendo have bloody run out of ideas for how to make a normal flying type work. They've now put a mask on a pheasant. Yeah, this can definitely go. Blitzel and Zeb Striker. Oh, Nintendo, you've still got some good ideas though, don't you? Yes, beautiful. A zebra, an electric zebra where the stripes are little lightning patterned and it's got a little lightning crest on its head. Of course we're keeping them. These guys are beautiful. I know they're just early game electric types and therefore we've already got several of those in play, but screw it, it's a zebra. I'm not made of stone. Woobat and Swoobat, a weird blob with wings on it and a heart on its nose flight. No, this is such a stupid idea, it cannot possibly exist. Drillbur and Excadrill. I actually quite like these guys. We've never had a mole Pokemon before, and the idea of them having kind of big metal claws to burrow down like a drill into the ground is actually quite a clever way of doing it. Alright, yeah, it can stay. Aldino. I honestly can't figure out why this thing exists. It's terrible in every way, and I don't know why it bloody exists. Timber, Gerda and Conkeldurr. I quite like these guys. They're like the Machop family, so I think they've got a lot more personality to them. Plus I like the fact that they're using different weapons as they get stronger. That's a lovely way of representing that they're getting more powerful as they go along. Yeah, you guys are welcome aboard. Throw and Sork that I'll do together because I think this is like the Pokemon that was developed at 5 to 6 on a Friday where someone just wanted to go home and they were told to develop 2 more fighting Pokemon before they went home for the weekend. So they just said, yeah, we'll just have a red bloke in a judo uniform and then a And then a blue bloke, also in a judo uniform. Yeah, we're done. With the exception of Seal, these may be the laziest designed Pokemon in the entire bloody franchise. Venipede, Whirlipede, and Scolipede. I quite like Venipede and Scolipede. They look kind of suitably lovely and evil. I know there's a lot of kind of bug poison types in the game, but to be honest, I've kicked out most of them already. And I think Venipede and Scolipede actually look kind of cool. And at least they don't bloody look like moths like all the rest of them do. So you know what? Let's keep Venipede and Scolipede, but we'll kick out Whirlipede because I'm not really sure. Again, it needs a cocoon phase. Petilil and Lilligant, boring grass types, not really adding much to the franchise, we've already got plenty of them. Basculin, basically Kavana, but nowhere near as interesting, gone. Sandow, Krokorok, and Crocodile. I like these guys, these are pretty damn badass. Plus I like the fact that Sandow just kind of looks happy and the black is just kind of part of the markings on it, but by the time it's become Crocodile, it's become clear that they look more like kind of sinister shades. That's quite a lovely design touch. However, like many times, we don't really need the middle evolution, so Krokorok can go, Sandow can just evolve directly into Crocodile. Darumaka and Darmanitan, I quite like these guys. I particularly like Darmanitan's kind of big flaming eyebrows and massive toothy grin and huge fists. I quite like them a lot. You know what? Fire is actually one of the rarer types in the game, so we'll let both of these guys stay. Though, whatever the hell the deal is with the Zen mode, let's get rid of that because that just looks bloody stupid. Maractus! It appears to be a bunny cactus. But we've already got a cactus in the form of Cacnea and Cacturne that I prefer a lot anyway, so let's just get rid of Maractus. Dwebble and Crustle, I quite like these guys. Even though we've already got a few crab Pokemon floating around, these guys are actually pretty cute. Bugrock isn't the most common type, and I don't think we've got one or two of them so far. And I just quite like Crustle wandering around with that kind of massive chunk of earth on its back, with the kind of the layers of earth in it. Scraggy and Scrafty. These Pokemon, as far as I can tell, their unique design thing seems to be that their trousers don't fit them very well. And that's incredibly stupid, so they're being got rid of. Sigilyph, basically Xatu, but massively over-designed. You see this is completely summing up what was wrong with the later generations of Pokemon. Sigilyph just looks ridiculous, it looks stupid. Xatu was everything Sigilyph should have been, but designed beautifully. Sigilyph is just unnecessary. Yamask, and Nintendo continuing to struggle with ghost Pokemon here. Yamask is just a mask tied to a shadow, and Caphragius is just a mummy sarcophagus with some dark hands coming off it. It's just, I don't know, I think these look kind of silly actually. Ghost Pokemon I think should look at least a little bit sinister, but to me these guys just look stupid. So no, I think we're going to get rid of them. Generation 5 had another set of fossil Pokemon, but to be honest we were back down into quite feeble ones. Tirtouga and Caracosta. Well, Caracosta is a turtle standing up on its hind legs. We already have Blastoise, but Caracosta, rather than looking like a badass, looks like an old man wearing a life jacket made out of stone. He just looks a bit stupid. And Arcan and Archeops as a rock flying type means they're in direct competition with Aerodactyl, but whereas Aerodactyl looks cool and badass, Archeops just looks really bloody stupid. Trubbish and Garbodor. This Pokemon is literally a bag of rubbish. I think we are getting rid of that. Zorua and Zoroark. Okay, fine, these guys look badass. They can stay. Minxino and Cinccino. Honestly, if there was a reward for the most boring Pokemon going, I think these guys would get it. Gothita, Gotharita, and Gothitelle. That's not a Pokemon, that's just an emo goth girl. Fails Rule 1. Bye. Solosis, Duocean, and Reuniclus. Kicked out on grounds of Rule 2, blobs with faces on them. Ducklet and Swanna. They might have made it in if we didn't already have Wingull and Pelipper, who are honestly basically doing the same thing, the water flying type, but are much cuter. Venonite, Venonlish, and Venilux. Nintendo, that's just an ice cream cone. That's just an ice cream cone with a face on it. Rule 4. A dessert with a face on it is not a bloody Pokemon. Deerling and Swordsbuck. This is kind of why I kicked out Stantler. I knew that Deerling and Swordsbuck were coming. Swordsbuck I think actually looks pretty damn cool. So you know what? Let's let it stay. Emolga, yet another bloody Pikachu ripoff. Go away. Carablast and Escavalier. Though honestly we need to evaluate these at the same time as Shelmet and Askelgor. Even though Shelmet and Askelgor happen like 40 Pokemon later in the National Dex. I don't know why they're separated when they're clearly part of a matching pair. These guys would get kicked out exclusively for having some weird evolution nonsense happening, which is Carablast needs to be traded with a Shelmet so that Carablast can steal this Shelmet shell so that it can evolve into Escavalier, and then Shelmet, once it doesn't have the shell anymore, has evolved into Axelgor. Which is stupid and convoluted from the player's perspective anyway, but it isn't helped by the fact that Escavalier is incredibly stupidly badly designed, because it's like a knight's helmet with some jousting things coming out of it. So basically it's a bug knight's helmet, which is incredibly stupid. And the fact that Shelmet, when it has its shell stolen from it, becomes miraculously incredibly tougher, which is just kind of stupid and ridiculous, because if it was that tough anyway, why was it in the shell in the first place? And then there's the fact that these Pokemon completely changed their function when they evolved. which I think is incredibly player unfriendly, because when you pick a Pokemon and you look at its stats, you expect it to broadly keep those stats. For example, if you brought a Shelmet into your team because you wanted a physical wall, and then it evolves into Axelgor, and all of a sudden it's not a physical wall anymore, all of a sudden it's got high speed and high attack stats, but it can't block for anything anymore. Both families are just a complete mess and need to be got rid of. Foongus and a Moongus, basically like Shroomish. Frillish and Jellicent, no, we've already got Tentacruel and Tentacruel. Aloma Mola, because Nintendo just decided to try and sneak bloody Loftus past us a second time for some reason. Joltik and Galvantula, I quite like Galvantula. A big furry electric spider's a really cool idea. Joltik, however, I don't think needs to exist, because it's just a little yellow ball of fluff with a face on it. So let's just get rid of Joltik and have Galvantula as a single evolution. I also think Bug Electric is unique, so it's quite a cool design, quite a unique typing. Yeah, let's keep it around. Ferroseed and Ferrothorn. If Forretress didn't already exist, I might allow these guys in, but honestly I find them just a bit of a Forretress ripoff. Mine saying is they're actually pretty good, but you know what? Grass Steel and Bug Steel are incredibly similar in lots of ways, so if we need to make some adjustments to make Forretress better, let's just do that. Clink Clang and Kling Clang, because it's a bloody set of cogs. It's also a terrible, terrible Pokemon, because it doesn't have particularly good special attack, but the vast majority of attacks it learns are special attack attacks, and also it learns a large number of electric attacks, and its Pokedex entry refers to a generator like it should be an electric type, but it's not, it's a pure steel type. It's just a stupid, lazy, idiotic Pokemon, and it's definitely going. Tynamo, E-Electric, and E-Electros. I actually quite like E-Electric and E-Electros. A kind of electric eel Pokemon, something that kind of we haven't had for a while. I'm almost kind of surprised looking back we haven't had one. Tynamo, however, I think is too tiny and insignificant to bother with, so let's just strip that out and just have it be E-Electric evolving into E-Electros. Though admittedly I do find it odd it's a pure electric type and not a water electric type. Especially as the Pokédex does make it clear it is supposed to be an underwater eel that can just come out on land sometimes, but alright, fine, pure electric it is. Marvin the paranoid android and his slightly larger friend. No, it's just a thing with a face on it. Litwick, Lampent and Chandelier. I quite like these guys. These guys are really, really cool. Ghost Fire is a fun, unique type. I like the kind of the slightly sinister, dark purple fire. I like the idea of like a haunted lantern. I think even though it's kind of a silly idea, like a candle becoming a lantern, becoming a chandelier, and that being a Pokemon, but I think it just somehow is just somehow beautifully designed. It's a lovely idea. It's got some good stats. It's kind of useful. Let's let it hang around. Axew, Fracture, and Haxorus. There's nothing technically wrong with these guys. They just feel like less interesting version of the Garchomp family, so sorry, I think we don't really need you for anything. Chubchoo and Beartic. No thanks, we've already got Teddiursa and Ursaring, and honestly, they're basically you, but better. Cryogonal, I don't even know what I'm bloody looking at this point. Nintendo, we're just getting lazy at this stage. It's just it's a snowflake, but it's crying. It's bloody ridiculous. Stunfisk, ground electric fish thing. No, I think we can do without that sort of ridiculousness. Mianfu and Mianshao, a slightly confusing fighting cat thing. I think we can do without that. Drudigon, honestly I find this like one of the ugliest, least interesting dragons there is. I think we can definitely do without that. Golett and Golurk, well, if you needed proof that Generation 5 was sometimes horrendously over-designed, there you go. Golurk is just, I think it's horrible. It's just so over-designed, it's horrifying. Ugh, no, it can definitely go. We've got enough ghosts now at this point anyway. Pawniard and Bisharp. Honestly, I just find these guys basically Lucario, but not quite as interesting, so that can go away. Buffalont, basically Tauros, but with some gold rings and an afro, which may possibly be racist, I'm not sure. Rufflet, Braviary, and at the same time, Vullaby and Mandibuzz. I actually quite like all of these guys. I quite like a little eagle that's entirely fluff with a single feather on its forehead that turns into a kind of a massive eagle creature. That's quite cool. And a Vulture. I'm actually almost surprised we haven't had a Vulture already, but that's actually quite cool as well. Kind of the little kind of baby Vulture that's incredibly fat that turns into a kind of a dark flying type. For some reason, I was never quite keen on Murkrow and Honchkrow, and one of the reasons I kicked them out was because I knew these guys were coming. As dark flying types, I think they kind of fill the job quite nicely. Heatmore and Durant. I'm going to do these two together because they're kind of part of a matched story pair where Durant is an ant and Heatmore is an anteater. I'm going to be honest, I think Heatmore is my least favourite Pokemon of all. I think it's just so incredibly stupid, it almost is unbelievable. It's a pure fire type, which means it's supposed to be like a creature that's evolved in the wild. It's not like man-made, it's not an animal. Yet it's got an exhaust pipe, or rather I suppose an air intake pipe, so it can suck in air to breathe fire out of its nose. But its arms are ridiculously too skinny, and the pattern around its wrists makes it look like it's kind of supposed to be got like flamethrowers built into it. It's just so stupid, it's hideous, and it needs to go. Durant, however, is just basically an ant. I mean, it's a bug steel type, so yeah, I can see how, like, heat more eats them, because fire's 4x effective against, you know, bug steel types, but it's just an ant with some metal plating. It's just boring, so it can go as well. Danos, Zweilous, and Hydreigon. I really quite like these guys. They're very, very cool. I like how Dano's quite happy with a bit of an emo fringe on it, and then Zweilous has the two kind of slightly happy emo fringe heads on it, but it's actually kind of picked up a couple of wings, and then finally it turns into a great big Hydra creature. A big Hydra with like 6 mini wings and 3 heads and a big tail. That's a fun way of doing a dragon that's different from anything we've seen before, and I quite like the dark dragon typing as well. That's quite good. Larvesta and Volcarona. Honestly, I just don't quite get the idea of a bug fire type that's like a moth thing that's made out of flames. I just don't get it. As for Cobalion, Terrakion, and Virizion, well, we've entered the Generation 5 Legendaries, and honestly, I find all of them incredibly boring for the most part. They're just not very interesting. These are just like some random coloured 4-legged animal things. They're just uninteresting. Like, compared to, like, say, Entei or Suicune, there's nothing interesting about them. Get rid of all of them. However, if those are just boring, Tornadus, Thundarus, and Landorus just look bloody stupid. I just don't... What the hell were they thinking when they created Tornadus? It's an old man who's green, sitting on a cloud, with a purple tentacle coming out of him, with some yellow slugs on it. It's just so incredibly stupid. I don't know what the hell they were bloody thinking of. Yep, no, all of them can go. Incredibly stupid. Reshiram I don't particularly like, but Zekrom I think looks pretty cool, so we'll keep Zekrom because, you know what, Dragon Electric's kind of cool, but Reshiram I just don't quite get, so I think that can go. And the other 4 I think all need to go. Overdesigned Dragon, My Little Pony, Random Woman, and Bug Gun are all not particularly interesting. And finally, Generation 6. Let's start off with the starters, quite appropriately enough. The Chespin family, I don't know what the hell Nintendo were doing here. Chestnut, I'm assuming, is supposed to be a cross between Chestnut and Juggernaut. So basically, it's a big bloke inside a conker, which is the stupidest idea I've ever heard. This is like my least favourite starter of all time. It doesn't help Chestnut that it's sharing a generation with some really cool starters, which is Fennekin, a fire fennec fox with little fiery fur coming out of its ears, is adorable. So Fennekin can evolve into Delphox, and we can get rid of the middle evolution again. Meanwhile, Froakie's cute, Greninja's an utter badass, and Frogadier, I think in this occasion Froakie evolving directly into Greninja would be a bit OTT, so we'll keep all 3 stages of Froakie's family. Bunnelby and Digglesby. By ripping off Buneary, Nintendo have now got to the stage where they're ripping off Pokemon that were already ripping off previous Pokemon, so obviously these guys aren't staying. Fletchling and family. Honestly, I quite like the fact that Nintendo tried to revitalise the bloody normal flying thing by making them into a fire flying type, but we've already got fire flying types, and to be honest, Talonflame, the final evolution, wasn't even that good. Scatterbug, this is pretty much the point where Nintendo just gave up, I think. Scatterbug's just horrendous. And then Spupa, its cocoon form, is basically just a permanent reminder why you've got it on your team. This thing has basically just spat up some saliva and is now living in it. I know bugs do actually do that, but I could do without being reminded of that while I'm playing computer games, thank you Nintendo. And if you go for all that, you eventually get Vivillon, which is not even that bloody good. The entire family can go. Litleo and Pyroar, so a lion Pokemon at last, and to my mind a pretty damn feeble one. Litleo just doesn't look that interesting, and Pyroar, I don't like the fact that its face doesn't really look like a mane, its face now looks like a big shield crest. Plus, I just can't get around the fact that this is basically just a poor man's Arcanine, so no, that can go. Flabebe, Floette, and Florges. I think I'm going to go kick these out just for the slightly horrifying fact that much like Paris, the fairy starts off by trying to pick a flower and then eventually merges with it, like the fly but with a flower. Skidoo and Go-Go. Finally, Nintendo remember how to design a bloody Pokemon. It's a cute little goat, it's got a nice grass touch around it, it's got a nice bit of simplicity to it, it's an adorable goat. Yeah, okay, we'll keep Skidoo and Go-Go, sure, why not? Pancham and Pangoro. I quite like these guys. Panda Pokemon, we've not had a Panda Pokemon before. Plus, I quite like the idea of a fighting panda, especially Pancham, which for an early evolution doesn't look like it's just cute, it actually still looks like it's quite tough. Same reason I like Trico, actually. I'm not sure if I remember to mention that at the time. Then evolves into Pangoro, which looks really quite nice and badass and very bulky and sturdy. Furfrou, this is a poodle Pokemon which can be decorated to look in various ways, which is a stupid idea and must be banished immediately. Espurr, I love Espurr, I love the expression on its face, and Meowstic's quite cool as well. We've not let in that many psychic types to be honest, so you know what, Espurr and Meowstic can both come in. Honage, Doublade, and Aegislash. Ah yes, Nintendo have just been sticking eyes on things. In fact, at this point, I'm not even sure they've bothered sticking eyes on things. They've just said that a sword, then two swords, then a sword and a shield are a Pokemon. I mean, the excuse is it's supposedly a ghost type, but it's such a stupid idea, I'm not really letting it pass. Spritzy and Aromatisse. I can't even figure out what these are supposed to be. I read all the Pokédex entries, and basically they're just pink blobs that smell nice, which can definitely go away therefore. Swirlix and Slurpuff, because obviously a face on an ice cream cone wasn't stupid enough last generation, now they're just putting faces actually on cotton candy. And that's what the Pokédex just says, this basically is just a blob of cotton candy, but with a face on it. So that can go. Inky and Malamar, we've already got Tentacruel and Tentacruel, move along please. Binacle and Barbaracle. This Pokemon needs to go for its own good. Barbaracle is made up of 7 Binacle entities, and each of its hands and feet and head are independent for each other. There will be a face or an eye or something on the bottom of those feet that's just being stamped into the dirt for all eternity, forced to obey instructions from the head. It's so monstrous it has to go. The fact that it's a rock water type and there's no bloody shortage of them doesn't help its cause either. Scrope and Dragalge. I honestly don't know what the hell I'm looking at here. I mean, I think I'm supposed to be looking at like an emaciated, poisonous seahorse creature that becomes a dragon that like floats through the ocean even though it's never a water type and like tears down boats, but I've no bloody clue. And Dragalge is just so incredibly badly designed that I can't even figure out what I'm looking at, so it's definitely going. Clauncher and Chloritza. Okay, fine, this is technically a Krabby Kingler ripoff where it's kind of a lobster creature where one of the claws gets massively bigger and then it uses that to fire things. But it's actually a lobster. I think this is actually the first lobster we've had. All the previous ones have generally been crabs. But I quite like this guy. Clauncher and Chloritza are actually quite nice. I just generally quite like them. So you know what? Sure, why not? Helioptile and Heliolisk. I wasn't originally going to let these guys in because Helioptile's not really that interesting. But Heliolisk I quite like the design of. We don't really have much in the way of like desert lizards. And I quite like the idea of him generating electricity from the sun. And then as soon as I read that in the Pokédex, I realised, okay, the reason he's got the black strip in the Helioptile phase and the kind of the black top of his head in the Heliolisk phase is because he's supposed to be like a solar panel. He's like a solar panel Pokemon, but like a lizard. There is actually that's really quite clever. So okay, fine, you know what, he can stay. Plus Electric Norm was a fairly unique typing. In fact, I think it's a completely unique typing. So sure, why not? Generation 6 also brought back some fossil Pokemon, but this time put some bloody thought into it. So Tyrant and Tyrantrum, the rock dragon types, and kind of Tyrannosaurus Rexes with huge amounts of attack stats. I love these guys. They're beautifully designed. Okay, they're kind of similar to the Rampardos family, but they're different enough. Rock dragons are really fun type to introduce into the game, and I just quite like the design, especially of Tyrantrum, with its big beard and spiky crest and crown on top of his head. Beautiful design. Sure, let's have him aboard. Then a Maura and Aurorus, kind of like a Brontosaurus type thing. A great big, supposedly the Tundra Pokemon, kind of wandering around icy environments. And I'm not so keen on a Maura, but I really do actually genuinely quite like Aurorus. Something about the big yellow flare things on the back of its neck that kind of really quite appeals to me. So you know what, let's have a Maura and Aurorus. Rock Ice I think is a unique type as well, so why not? So Horlucha is basically a Lucha Libre wrestler but an eagle, which is such a stupid idea I'm not even considering it, so bye. Deden is this generation's ripoff of Pikachu, so long. Carpink is basically, as far as I can tell, just a fairy that's trapped in a rock, so no. Goomy, Sliggoo and Goodra are possibly the stupidest ideas for dragons yet, which is Goomy is basically a slug that hides in dark places because it's so scared of being eaten by something. Sliggoo, the evolved form, loses its eyesight by accident when it's evolved, so now can't even see. And then when it evolves into Goodra, it likes hugging its trainer even though it's incredibly sticky and gross to hug. So pretty much every stage of that evolution fails for some reason and we're going to get rid of it. Klefki is a collection of keys, so yes, I think we're getting rid of that. Phantom and Trevenant, it's just the stereotypical haunted tree from a horror film, so honestly, no, I don't really like it. I mean, Grass Ghost is fine, but the next entries, Pumpkaboo and Goregeist, I think are actually kind of cooler and are also Grass Ghost types. So you know what, let's just have Pumpkaboo and Goregeist, because I quite like the idea of like a haunted pumpkin thing. That's a nice idea for a ghost. Bergmite and Avalugg, Nintendo have completely run out of ideas at this point. Avalugg is literally an iceberg with a face on the front, and Bergmite is just a bit of ice with 2 eyes on it. Nintendo have completely run out of ideas. Noibat and Noiburn, bat Pokemon, but to be honest they look worse than Zubat and Golbat do, so no, I don't think so. Plus they're dragon flying types, which is a very common type and we've got more than enough of those already. Xerneas, I love Xerneas. Xerneas' design is beautiful. I love the kind of the big flowing wibbly antlers that come off it. That's absolutely gorgeous. And you know what? Its counterpart from Pokemon Y can come along too. Zygarde, however, I don't get Zygarde. Dragon Ground, even though it doesn't like a dragon, it doesn't like a ground type. If you asked me to guess, I'd probably have said Dark Poison. So I just don't get it. I think it looks so stupid. I think we genuinely just need to get rid of Zygarde. Diancie, as far as I can tell, this is basically supposed to be like, even though it's not related to Carbink, it's basically a Carbink where the fairy got partly free of the rock. So it's just like a fairy that's half sticking out of a rock. So no, I think that's a stupid idea. The final two, however, we don't know much about, Hooper and Volcanion, because I think these are special event Pokemon that haven't even made it out of Japan yet. So Hooper is basically just a slightly sinister looking ghost thing with rings, and Volcanion is a fire-water type that mixes fire and water together, so wanders around spraying steam everywhere, both of which are pretty stupid ideas, so I think we can do without them. So there you are, ladies and gentlemen. That is the complete sift of the National Dex, and what you are seeing is the new Many a True Pokedex. So Nintendo, you know what to do. Just take this list, make a full 3D Pokemon game out of the Wii U. Not like Colosseum, a proper one. You don't even need to send me a check. Use it for free, it's fine. And for those of you who are curious, this turned out to be 293 Pokemon. We've got the number of Pokemon down from 721 down to 293. A very good result, if I do say so myself. Thank you for those of you who have decided to stick around with me for way more than an hour just talking about Pokemon that I do and don't like. Thank you as well for those of you who are part of the 150,000 subscribers that have all stuck around. And welcome to anyone who's not yet part of the 150,000 subscribers. Come along, join us, the water's lovely. But yes, there you go. That is Pokemon. Gotta cull them all. Blimey, that took a while to do. Exhausting, I need to go and get a cup of tea. But yes, maybe some more of this sort of thing at some point in the future, but not for a little while, I think. But in the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, I've been John, this has been Many a True Nerd, and this has been Pokemon, gotta cull 'em all. Thank you very much, and goodbye. Haha, I'm a genius at time. Oh, okay, this escalated quickly. I'd like to fly your drone. So good about a butterfly in a bucket. What does that tell you about the human condition? Are we the butterfly and is capitalism the bucket? What happens if you go right to the back in time? The very beginning of time. Oh, you literally just burn the universe.